Welcome to MysteryCon. Have you ever considered that your dreams might be engineered by an unseen curator? Or that something pulses alive beneath the runways of Denver International Airport? If these questions intrigue you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell before our signal fades. And one more question. How has your day been? The dreams didn't scare me at first. What scared me was how good I started to feel. I downloaded Somnest on a Monday, another rainy evening in Seattle, the kind that blurred everything into a grey hum. The app was sleek, soft-toned, with a voice that promised emotional recalibration through guided nocturnal frameworks. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. My name's Jason Wolfe, 35, freelance UX designer, insomniac by necessity, cynic by habit. I'd been running on fumes for weeks, too many hours staring at screens, too much coffee, too many silent nights pacing my apartment, while the city sighed outside my window. But the first night I used it, I passed out within minutes, not just to sleep. Gone. No tossing, no waking up at 3 a.m. soaked in adrenaline. And when I opened my eyes the next morning, it was like something had clicked back into place. I felt aligned. There's no better word for it. Not happy exactly, but clear. Like static had been draining me for years, and now someone had tuned the signal. By Thursday, I was sleeping full cycles. My anxiety dipped. I stopped doom scrolling before bed. I even reconnected with my sister just to talk. I'd never experienced calm like this before. It was addictive. But then the dreams began. Not nightmares, not exactly. Just patterned, structured. I'd find myself standing at the foot of massive staircases carved from mossy stone, rising endlessly through pine forests that pulsed like lungs. Other nights, I wandered silent corridors, under violet skies led by shadows of people I didn't recognize, always the same humming in the background, metallic, female, comforting and cold. It followed me through every dream. When I mentioned it to Claire at work, half joking, half wondering if I'd finally snapped, she went still. "Did she sing or hum?" she asked. "Because I've heard her too." I laughed, but she didn't. She just sipped her tea and said nothing else. That night I searched Reddit. The posts were buried, scattered across obscure threads, but they were there. Somnest dreams. Faceless woman. Stairs in the woods. Hundreds of people, different countries, different languages, but the same imagery, the same patterns. We weren't just dreaming, we were sharing something that felt planted. I spent the weekend trying to rationalize it. Shared imagery, archetypes, some kind of psychological overlap explained by the app's influence. But that didn't account for the specifics. The numbers whispered in dreams, the woman's voice, the exact cadence of the hum. None of it felt random. It was too exact. I kept digging. Reddit, Discord, archived forums. Anywhere people talked about strange dream experiences. Patterns emerged. Users described not only similar dreams, but identical sensations. The same time of night, the same sleep cycle phase. Some even reported the exact phrasing in whispers. Sequence begins at 4, follow the stairs, or you were chosen. I bookmarked everything, started saving threads offline. By Sunday night, I was wide awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, phone face down beside me. I'd uninstalled Somnest, disconnected the Wi-Fi, even pulled the SIM card from my phone. Still, when I finally drifted off, the humming was waiting for me. Louder now. On Monday, things got weirder. My Chrome history reset overnight. Bookmarks I'd created were gone. I thought maybe I'd wiped them by mistake, but then my Spotify. queue was filled with ambient playlists I'd never listened to, tracks with names like Compliance Tone and Memory Salt. I opened my voice memo app to record a note for myself. There were 5 new entries. I pressed play on one. It was my voice, but slower, flat, emotionless. The frequency is safest at 14.2 hertz, I said. The stairs lead to resonance. I listened to all 5. Each message was from me, but I had no memory of recording them. Same tone, same dead inflection, same keywords. I called Claire that night. No answer. I texted her twice. Nothing. The next morning, her desk was empty. Her nameplate gone. HR told me she'd transferred out of state. No notice, no goodbyes. I asked if they had forwarding info. The rep paused, then repeated the same sentence like a script. That afternoon, I drove to her apartment. The name on the buzzer had changed. I rang anyway. No answer. I stood there for a long time, watching the hallway, waiting for something, anything to break the silence. I checked her social accounts, wiped. The photos were still there, but the captions were gone, replaced with abstract words. Equilibrium, realignment, path complete. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in the dark with a pen and notepad, listing every phrase I could remember from the dreams. I didn't know what I was looking for. But something was looking back. By midweek, I stopped trusting my devices. My phone would light up for no reason. Notifications appeared and vanished before I could read them. The battery drained faster than usual, even in airplane mode. I bought a cheap flip phone and left my smartphone powered down in a drawer. Still, strange things kept happening. My laptop crashed when I tried to revisit the dream threads I'd saved. My backup drive beeped erratically, files disappearing one by one. I tried to explain it away. Corrupted data, faulty hardware, but deep down, I knew better. Something was removing information. Selectively. Systematically. I started writing by hand again, logging every phrase, every image, every sound from the dreams. But even that didn't feel safe. One morning, I woke to find pages missing from my notebook, torn cleanly out, no mess, no shreds, just gone. I took walks late at night to clear my head, but even outside I felt watched. Streetlights would flicker as I passed. Cars would idle a little too long at corners. Once, a stranger brushed past me downtown and said softly, "You've already seen it." I turned, but he was gone. The city didn't feel like home anymore. Everything felt a step off. When I looked at billboards, I noticed phrases from the dreams embedded in the fine print. Embrace resonance. Align for clarity. Words I'd never noticed before. I started avoiding screens altogether. Coffee shops, transit ads, even menus seemed to echo back symbols and numbers from my notes. I wasn't paranoid. I was surrounded. I visited Claire's old apartment just to see. The building manager told me no one by that name had ever lived there. I pulled up an old photo of us in the office, one I knew she'd taken. Her face was blurred, not pixelated, erased, as if she'd never been in the frame. That night I played the last voice memo again, the sound of my own voice whispering, "It continues without you," was quiet but clear. I sat in the dark, holding the phone, trying to remember if I'd said those words or just dreamed them. For the first time, I wasn't sure there was a difference. I stopped using the internet altogether. Anything I typed, searched, or read seemed to echo back in ways I couldn't explain. Instead, I used notebooks, maps, and printouts. But even that felt exposed. I changed my routine. Different grocery stores, different walking paths, no patterns. Still I felt followed. People on the bus stared too long. Voices in crowds seemed to repeat phrases I'd written down days earlier. Once, I passed two teenagers, laughing, and one of them hummed the exact melody from my dream. The metallic tone down to the pause between notes. I froze. He glanced at me, smirked, and kept walking. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, a message appeared on my flip. Phone. No number, just a single sentence. Stop corrupting the signal. I hadn't told anyone. Not friends, not family. I hadn't posted or emailed anything in weeks. I threw the phone in a trash bin and kept walking. Later, I borrowed a public computer at the library. I created a fresh email under a fake name and contacted someone I'd found on one of the archived threads, a former software engineer who had claimed to work on Somnest's backend before it was sold. Within an hour, I got a reply. A burner address, a time, a place. No electronics, come alone. It took me 2 days to decide. I took a bus to the border, crossed into Canada, and boarded a train to Vancouver under another name. I paid in cash, left no record. My head pounded the entire ride. Every time the train slowed, I imagined black-suited men waiting on the platform. At the station, I saw no one, just rain and strangers. I found the meeting spot, a small cafe, near the harbour, and waited. She arrived exactly at 6. Early 40s, worn clothes, sharp eyes. She looked at me, nodded once, and said only, "You were tagged. That's how they find you." I didn't speak. I couldn't. She leaned in. "They don't just listen through your dreams, they rewrite you, one pattern at a time." She wasn't afraid. She was tired, like me. I realized then, this wasn't a theory, it was already happening. She called. Herself, Mira. No last name, no credentials, but she knew too much to doubt. Her hands trembled when she spoke, like the effort of resisting something internal took constant energy. We sat in the corner of that dim cafe for nearly 2 hours. She explained that Somnest wasn't an app. It was a shell. The real program ran beneath it, quietly syncing users into categorized clusters based on emotional responsiveness, memory plasticity, and behavioral compliance. Each dream wasn't just curated, it was calibrated, adjusted in real time based on subtle biometric feedback. Most people never noticed. The ones who did, like me, were tagged. "The woman in your dreams?" she asked. "She's not a symbol. She's a protocol, a synthetic continuity agent." Mira showed me sketches, symbols from the dreams, codes she'd pulled from buried directories in Somnest's encrypted cache. Some matched the phrases I'd recorded without knowing. Others I recognized instantly but had never seen before. When I asked why the dreams hadn't stopped after I deleted the app, she looked almost sad. The moment you complied, the architecture embedded itself. It's self-reinforcing. You're no longer receiving signals, you're generating them. I felt sick. The idea that my own mind was now part of the system, worse, that it was sustaining it, broke something in me. I left the cafe without saying goodbye. The next days blurred. I stopped answering calls, even from numbers I didn't recognize. I covered the mirrors in my room. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at my reflection too long, humming without realizing. At night, I dreamed of compliance, not fear, not escape, gratitude. I thanked the voice, smiled at the woman with no face. Woke up whispering phrases I couldn't translate. My handwriting began to change. Curved symbols replaced words in my notes. The original pages smudged. Whole sections faded like they'd been soaked and dried, though the notebook had never left my desk. Some symbols reappeared hours later, rearranged, as if I'd written in my sleep. I couldn't prove it, but I stopped trusting even my own pen. Even when I hid the notebooks, I'd wake to find them open beside my bed, pages filled with diagrams I didn't draw. One evening, I watched a news clip with closed captions turned on. The subtitles didn't match the words. They matched my dreams. He aligns willingly. Path is stable. Continuum preserved. I shut off the TV and sat in silence. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was becoming them. I stopped fighting during the day. There was no point. Every attempt to resist, routines, rituals, even silence, only pushed me deeper into the pattern. But at night, I began experimenting, not with devices or journals, with thought. I tried to introduce chaos into the dreams. I visualized non-repeating shapes, nonsensical phrases, made-up languages. Anything that felt incompatible with the order, I sensed pressing in. At first, nothing worked. The dreams overrode everything. The woman still appeared, still humming, still watching, but slowly cracks formed. One night I imagined a shape that bent in impossible ways, an object with no symmetry, no known frame of reference. She paused. Didn't vanish, didn't speak. Just stopped humming. I woke up, gasping. The room was quiet. For the first time, in weeks I didn't feel watched. The next night I pushed further. I thought in fragments, disconnected memories, fake scenarios, people who never existed. When I felt the signal trying to align me, I disrupted it. I pictured broken clocks, incorrect equations, chaotic noise. The dreams fought back. Some nights I woke with nosebleeds. Others, I'd find bruises I couldn't explain. But I kept going. My dreams grew darker, yes, but also freer. Less structured, more mine. The woman appeared less often. When she did, her form flickered. Her voice lost clarity. One night I whispered back to her, something meaningless, a sound with no pattern, and she stepped backward, dissolving into static. I built mental anchors, scrambled concepts the system couldn't map. I invented names with no etymology, imagined colors with properties that didn't exist. I rehearsed random sequences of numbers before sleep, like passwords to disrupt the entry point. I even tried thinking in accents that weren't mine, just to distort the voice that carried the dreams. It was crude, but over time it started working. Over time, I could hold these thoughts without triggering the usual response. I called it dissonance training. Each night became a test. Some dreams felt like traps, filled with fake rooms and false voices. Others were empty, just silence and blackness. But that silence was mine. And in that stillness I began to remember who I was before the app, before the calibration, before the tagging. The woman hadn't vanished. The system hadn't shut down. But I was learning to exist outside the pattern, not invisible, not safe, but separate. And in this world, that was enough. I knew I couldn't win, not in the traditional sense. The system was too vast, too embedded, but I could learn to live beyond its reach, even if only by inches. I kept my thoughts fractured, unpredictable. I limited language. I stopped responding to anything familiar in the dreams. Some nights I didn't dream at all. Those mornings were different, quiet, still. I'd wake without fear, without the residual hum in my ears. One of those mornings I opened the app out of habit. I hadn't touched it in weeks. It was still installed, untouched, on a burner phone I'd kept, powered off. But now the screen was blank. No interface, no menus, just one word at the center, non-compliant. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't smile. I didn't feel relief, just clarity. I deleted the app, not from the phone, but from myself. I stopped needing to test if it worked. I knew, whatever control they once had, it no longer held. My dreams were mine again. The woman no longer came. The hum was gone. But the world around me hadn't changed. Ads still repeated familiar phrases. People still scrolled, still slept with headphones in. Their eyes still drifted when I spoke. I saw it now. Not control exactly, but influence. Gentle, constant shaping. Most would never question it. And if they did, the system would soothe them back into alignment. I didn't try to wake anyone. I didn't post warnings or write manifestos. I knew better. Resistance wasn't about rebellion. It was about presence, attention, choosing dissonance in a world tuned for ease. I moved again, found a quiet place with no smart speakers, no background music, no passive data collection. I wrote on paper. I watched the wind instead of screens. I learned to sit with silence, even when it felt like something was missing. The world continued on, smooth, curated, calm. But I remembered. I remembered the dreams that weren't mine, the voice that had shaped them. And I remembered how to forget her. That was the part they never anticipated. You don't need to escape the system, you just need to stop dreaming their dreams. They told me the tunnels were for utilities. Then why do some doors only appear after midnight? For 2 years I cleaned the same 6 buildings at Denver International Airport. Nothing glamorous, just overnight janitorial work on the graveyard shift. Name's Malik, just a janitor, nothing fancy. I worked the graveyard shift at Denver International mostly alone. I kept to myself, clocked in, scrubbed floors, took breaks with the vending machines. It paid well enough to cover rent, meds, for my daughter's asthma and not much else. The airport's always had a weird energy, sure, but airports are liminal by nature. People in transit, voices on speakers, a sense of unreality that comes with fluorescent lights at 2 a.m. I never paid it much mind, not until my radio started, humming on its own. At first, I thought it was interference, maybe a faulty unit. But the static had a rhythm to it, low, pulsing, like someone whispering through gravel. I mentioned it to Elise, another night janitor, mostly as a joke. She didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled out her phone and played a voicemail she'd saved. The voice on it was sharp with panic. "Don't follow the doors, they weren't there before. The sound, it's alive." Then static. That janitor, Elise said, didn't come back after that night. No resignation. Just vanished. At the time, I brushed it off as a bad joke. We lose people sometimes. Turnover is high on graveyard crews. But then I started noticing things. A panel labelled Red Access, never seen it before, warm to the touch like it had a heartbeat. Light strips flickering along service corridors, blinking in sequences too regular to be a fault. A pattern, like code. I figured I was overtired, overworked. I told myself that enough times to half believe it. But then I saw one of those doors, metal, no signage, just standing there behind a loading bay that was empty the night before. I blinked and it was gone. Not locked. Gone, I asked.
Security about it the next shift.
The guy didn't even pretend to answer. Just looked past me like someone was behind me. There wasn't. That was when I started to keep notes. Not for work. For myself. Something was wrong under the airport. I just hadn't realized yet how deep it went. The night after Elise played me that voicemail, I stopped taking my breaks in the staff lounge. Instead, I walked the perimeter tunnels. Not aimlessly, I had a route mapped in my head. Every hallway, every service door. I wasn't looking for anything, not yet, just trying to prove to myself that nothing had changed, but something had. One of the panels near gate C27 had a new tag, Red Access Level 2. I'd cleaned that wall 100 times. That panel was never there. I pressed my hand against it, warm. Not electrical warm, body warm, like something alive was just behind it. When I returned to my cart, the radio buzzed again. Not static this time. A single word, low and distorted. Again. That night I didn't sleep when I got home. I sat in the kitchen with my daughter's baby monitor next to me, just listening. I didn't know what I was waiting for. By morning I convinced myself it was stress, lack of sleep. Elise's story had gotten into my head, but when I got to work the next night, I found an elevator in the maintenance wing I'd never seen before, old, unmarked, not on any map. I pressed the button. Nothing happened. I came back at exactly 3:33 a.m. and don't ask me why, it just felt right. This time the light blinked and the door opened without a sound. Inside, the panel had only one floor listed. Oh, no number, just a dash. I didn't step in. I'm not reckless. But I watched the door close again and waited. No movement, no sound. I asked maintenance about it later. They looked confused. Said there was no elevator in that corridor. I went back. It was gone. Not locked. Gone. Like the door from before. I started checking the official floor plans during lunch. DIA keeps archived maps on the intranet, but the layouts didn't match what I knew. Entire wings weren't listed. Corridors I'd walked just last week vanished from every blueprint. I printed one out, circled the areas I'd cleaned. I held it up to a light. Some of the paper felt thicker, like layers pressed together. I peeled at the corner. Underneath was another layout. Smaller rooms, tighter halls. A blueprint beneath the blueprint. That's when I stopped trying to forget what I'd seen and started trying to understand it. I kept the altered blueprint folded in my back pocket for days. During breaks, I traced the hidden corridors with my thumb, memorizing each turn, each shadowed room that didn't exist officially. At work, I stopped telling people what I was doing. I avoided Elise, even though she'd started all this. It wasn't about trust. It was about not dragging anyone else into something I couldn't explain. The janitor's lounge began to feel hostile. Conversation stopped when I walked in. Eyes flicked toward the hallway behind me. A new security guard started showing up during our shift, standing too close to cleaning carts, pretending to check badge readers. His name tag just said M. Lewis. I never saw him actually do anything. One night I asked him if he needed help finding something. He just smiled and said, "You've already found it, haven't you?" Then walked away. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just imagining things. But doubt crept in anyway. What if I had read too much into the static? What if the panel was real, but just unlisted maintenance? Stress plays tricks. So I tested it. I printed another map from the staff system. Then I compared it to my roots again. Same result. More missing corridors, more impossible overlaps. Then, as I walked through the freight tunnel between terminals, B and C, I felt it. Deep, rhythmic rumbling under the floor. It wasn't construction. DIA isn't allowed to build during night hours due to noise protocols. But this wasn't noise. It was pressure, like something moving far beneath the concrete. When I mentioned it to a supervisor in passing, he paused, just a second too long before responding. "Probably just air recirculation," he said, avoiding eye contact. The next day, the vent systems in that wing were under review, and we were reassigned to other buildings. That same week, my access badge stopped working at 3 different doors. No warning. When I asked IT, they told me there had been a system update, a glitch. I didn't believe it. Not anymore. At home, I watched videos about subterranean structures, military infrastructure, psychological operations, not for answers, for patterns. I stopped sleeping through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that word from the radio again. Always at 3:33 a.m., Elise didn't show up for work one night. No message, no call, just gone. I checked her locker during my shift, empty. Even her nameplate was removed. When I asked around, no one seemed to remember her. Some claimed they'd never worked with anyone by that name. But I knew better. I had the voicemail on my phone. Except when I pulled it up, it was gone. Not deleted, erased. The file had vanished without a trace. I still remembered the sound, though, that voice warning about the doors. I started carrying a second phone, offline, unregistered. I used it to take photos in the tunnels, door frames that weren't there the week before, lights blinking in fixed sequences. One night I followed a freight corridor past the perimeter of my cleaning zone. It ended at a concrete wall that looked solid, but the air near it was warm. When I pressed my hand against it, it flexed slightly. Not stone, some kind of material designed to mimic it. I pushed harder. The wall gave way, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough to slip through. Behind it was a staircase, spiraling down into polished stone. No lights, but everything glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. The walls were covered in carvings, not writing, but long, shallow grooves. Claw marks, that's what they looked like, deep and deliberate. I turned back. I wasn't ready to see what waited below. When I returned to the main corridor, the false wall sealed itself behind me. It looked solid again, like it had never moved. That night, I posted the photos to a private forum I trusted. By morning, my account had been flagged, the images blurred with a warning about manipulated content. Then my phone reset itself. No factory wipe. A full format. Contacts, messages, everything gone. I didn't bother reporting it. I already knew what would happen. At work, my locker had been cleaned out. My shift supervisor told me I'd been scheduled for stress leave. A file had been submitted on my behalf. Not a request, an order. The paper was already signed. I stood in the break room holding the form, wondering how far this would go. And for the first time I felt like someone was watching me, not metaphorically, literally. I didn't sign the stress leave form. I folded it neatly, slid it into my jacket, and walked out. I wasn't ready to disappear like Elise. For the next 2 days I stayed off the grid. No calls, no emails. I used cash. I kept my phone powered down. I checked into a cheap motel off Peña Boulevard under a different name and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. That was somehow worse. The silence felt coordinated, like the airport had exhaled and was waiting for me to come back. So I did. 3 nights later, dressed like a contractor, I walked through a rear access point I'd cleaned 100 times. The badge reader had been replaced, but I knew the timing on the delivery trucks and slipped in behind one. No one stopped me. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the freight corridor, to the false wall. It opened like before, quiet, smooth, as if it had been expecting me. I took the stairs. The descent felt wrong. The further I went, the heavier the air became. Not just in temperature or pressure, something deeper. Like the air itself didn't want me there. The walls shimmered faintly, as if they held heat without a source. I passed levels that didn't match the airport's layout. There were no doors, just hollow spaces cut into the stone. I started to hear breathing, not mine, deeper, slower, rhythmic. I couldn't tell if it was real or in my head, but I kept going. The stairs finally ended at a landing. In front of me stood a door, unlike anything I'd seen, tall, curved, and completely black. It looked like obsidian but pulsed gently with heat. No seams, no hinges, just there, waiting. In the center was a symbol carved into the surface, a spiral, inverted, curling inward. At first, it looked decorative, but the longer I stared, the more it shifted. Slowly, deliberately. Not etched, not painted, alive, turning in on itself like it wasn't made to be seen, but to be followed. The pattern shifted slowly, turning in on itself. A map, but not of a place, of a process. That's when I understood the airport wasn't hiding something beneath it. It was built to hold something in. But the vibrations in the air told me the seal wasn't holding, not anymore. I stood before the door for a long time, unsure whether to touch it. The warmth radiating from it wasn't steady. It pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The spiral at the center shifted gently, drawing my eyes inward. I didn't want to reach out. I just did. My hand moved without command, resting flat against the surface. It was smooth and impossibly warm. Then everything changed. I didn't hear a sound. I felt one. A low frequency deep in my chest, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. My vision
narrowed. The air around me thickened. Not with heat or smoke, just presence. The door didn't open, not physically, but I saw what was behind it. Not with my eyes. I saw inward.
into something vast and ancient. The spiral was more than a symbol. It was an instruction, a way to reshape thought. I pulled my hand back. My palm left a faint impression that faded as quickly as it formed. I stumbled backward, gasping. The
air was cold now. Whatever connection I had made, it had taken something, or given it. I couldn't tell. I climbed the stairs, faster than I'd come down. My legs ached, my breath shallow. When I reached the top, the false wall was still open.
I slipped through it, back into the tunnel. But something was different. The lights no longer flickered. They stayed perfectly still, humming softly. My radio, untouched for days, crackled to life in my pocket. It didn't speak, just a single tone, high, steady, constant. It stayed on until I left the terminal. I made it home before sunrise. My hands shook. My clothes smelled like earth and ozone. I tried to sleep, but my thoughts wouldn't stop. I kept drawing the spiral over and over without realizing it. On napkins, scraps of mail, the inside of my hand. It felt like a reflex, like I was practicing. A language I hadn't learned, but somehow understood. That night, I sat in silence. I listened. And beneath the quiet, beneath the city, beneath the concrete and steel, I heard the breathing again. Only now I recognized the rhythm. It wasn't
asleep. It was learning me, not watching, absorbing.
Like it needed to know how I thought before it spoke back, as I had started learning it. I left Denver 3 days later. Not by choice exactly. I packed a bag, turned off my phone, and drove west until the highway blurred into desert. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister, who used to watch my daughter on weekends. It wasn't safe to explain what I'd seen. Maybe it still isn't. But the silence eats at you after a while. So I've started talking, carefully. Quiet places, private forums. I never share names or exact details, just signals. Signs to watch for. Because once you know what to look for, you start seeing them everywhere. Symbols carved into overpasses, frequencies buried in radio static, echoes in subway tunnels that don't match the surface. I keep moving, short stays, no patterns.
Off-grid when I can.
My daughter lives with my sister now, far from the airport. She's safe. That's what matters. I send what I can, money orders, handwritten letters. I never include a return address. I don't dream anymore, not in the usual sense. What I see at night now feels more like transmission than memory. Pulses of light, spinning forms, soundless messages that leave no images behind, only impressions. It's not frightening, not anymore. It's familiar. Like a language I'm slowly remembering. I don't think it was meant to be found. Whatever's under the airport wasn't buried by mistake. The spiral wasn't drawn to invite. It was sealed, held back, contained. But the seal is weakening. I felt it on my last night there. The vibrations had changed, no longer steady, no longer bound. It isn't breaking through. It's being let out. In patterns, in pieces, through systems we don't understand but still depend on. Someone turned the key, maybe not today, maybe years ago, but the locks are opening. Airports, power grids, satellite arrays, infrastructure that pretends to be for us. I don't know who built the airport. Not really.
But I know now it wasn't just for travel, it was a lock. And that lock is no longer secure. So I tell people, gently. Not about what's under there, that wouldn't help. I warn them about the design, about the systems built to distract, because
what's beneath Denver isn't waking up. It's climbing, and most people will never notice until it's already inside. The signal didn't make sense, but neither did the way my memories skipped every time I played it back, I said, though back then I was still Adam. I used to think the radio static helped me sleep. It was the one noise I could control, a wall of fuzz between me and everything I didn't want to think about. Out here in rural Nebraska, there's not much to interfere with the bands, which is why I noticed it right away. A clean loop hidden in the background noise. First it was just coordinates repeating like a broken record, and then the whisper came in, garbled, human maybe, but not quite. I thought I was picking up some pirate broadcast or a misrouted signal, so I posted it on a ham radio forum I'd been lurking on for years. That was my first mistake. The second was checking back. By morning the thread had blown up, not in the usual way, no memes, no trolling, just quiet reports from users in Kansas, Montana, even up in Ohio. Different equipment, different weather, same loop, same tone, same coordinates. But here's what got under my skin. None of those locations matched the coordinates. And when I tried to check the thread again in the afternoon, it was gone. Not locked. Not moved. Wiped. Like it had never existed. Most of the replies vanished too. One user messaged me before he disappeared. Just 5 words. It's not tech. It's memory. I laughed it off at first. Thought maybe it was a prank or some RG someone was beta testing. But that night, I left the loop running in the background as I tuned other bands and something strange happened. I forgot my own call sign. It's the one thing I never forget. Had to look it up like it belonged to someone else. When I finally went to bed, my dreams were just strings of numbers. Woke up sweating, confused, like I'd been somewhere. But I couldn't tell you where, only that it felt wrong. The coordinates were burned into my mind by then. I didn't even write them down. I didn't have to. The loop was still playing. But now, it sounded like it was playing for me. I didn't plan to drive out there. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. The numbers kept showing up on receipts, gas station pumps, even the digital clock on my microwave. Same latitude, same longitude. A field about 2 hours west, near a forgotten stretch of 2-lane blacktop. I packed a shovel, a map, and the portable rig I'd used since college. Didn't tell anyone, didn't feel like I could. That morning, the whisper in the loop had changed. It was clearer, slower. I couldn't make out words, but the cadence reminded me of someone trying to remember a dream out loud. The field was empty. No farmhouse, no livestock. Just wind moving through waist-high grass and an old barbed wire fence half swallowed by weeds. The coordinates led me to a slight rise in the ground. Just a bump, barely noticeable. I scanned the area with the rig. The loop was stronger here. Cleaner. No interference. I marked a 10-foot radius and started digging. The first few feet were just dry soil and roots, and then the shovel struck something solid. Not rock, metal. Smooth and cold even under the sun. I cleared it off as much as I could. It was a cube, perfect edges, no markings, maybe 4 feet wide. I touched it. It was warm, vibrating slightly. Not enough to see, but enough to feel. Like it was alive, or maybe reacting to me. I took a few pictures with my phone and tried to upload them to the forum, but the app crashed. When I restarted it, the photos were gone. Not moved, deleted, and not just those. Half my gallery was wiped clean. I got back in the truck, locked the doors and sat there, staring at the field. I didn't understand what I'd found, I still don't. But it felt old, not ancient in the usual sense, just outside of time. Like it had been waiting. That night I left the radio on again. The loop was back, but now the whisper was layered with something else. A second voice. Fainter, familiar. It sounded like my father, but he's been dead for years. I didn't sleep. I just listened. I tried to ignore the voice. Told myself it was audio pareidolia, my brain pulling patterns from noise, filling gaps with memories. But by the third night, the loop didn't just sound like my father. It was him. Same pauses. Same way he used to clear his throat before telling me I wasn't trying hard enough. He said my name. Twice. Calm. Rehearsed. I pulled the plug on the radio and turned off the breakers to be safe, but the sound kept going. Faintly. From the walls. I needed confirmation, something tangible, to prove I wasn't unraveling. I returned to the forum to check if others still heard the loop, but the entire thread was gone, not just mine, the whole section dedicated to signal anomalies. Erased. I searched usernames I remembered from before. All deleted. When I tried to message one user directly, I got a bounce back. Account does not exist, but I knew it had. I'd chatted with him only 3 days earlier. I dug into cached pages, old backups, nothing remained. Then the email started, my inbox lit up with password reset requests I hadn't made. 10, then 20, blank messages followed, sent from an IP that traced back to a government domain. Not a department I recognized, just a long string of numbers and a cold feeling in my chest. I changed all my passwords, disconnected the router, and ran diagnostics on my machine. No viruses. No trace of the messages left behind, like they were never there. I was about to give up when I got a direct message from one of the few usernames
I recognized. The subject line was just a question mark. The message inside said, "They found mine, it's not tech, it's memory." That was it. No name, no return address.
The message auto-deleted 5 seconds after I read it. I didn't touch anything, it vanished on its own. Something had changed in the signal. It wasn't just broadcasting, it was searching, reaching. I could feel it watching even when the radio was off. My reflection in the dark window didn't quite match my expression. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the signal itself or the way it was starting to feel familiar. I stopped trusting my house after that. Every room felt like it was holding something back. The static wasn't just on the radio anymore. It followed me into dreams, into moments of silence, humming beneath the refrigerator, behind the shower tiles, even under the floorboards. And the dreams kept escalating. I'd wake up with new sets of coordinates scribbled on my notepad, written in my own handwriting, though I didn't remember writing them. I checked each one. Every location was the same story. Abandoned farmland, quiet roads, nothing on satellite maps. And each site had another structure, always the same cube, same smooth metal, same hum, always just beneath the surface. The third site I visited had footprints, not mine. They circled the dig site like someone had paced for hours. No tire tracks, no tools, just that same invisible weight in the air. I didn't dig that time. I couldn't. The air felt too thick, like it would crush me if I stayed. On the drive home, I passed the same silver SUV 3 separate times, each time parked, facing oncoming traffic, lights off, engine running. I started watching the rear view more than the road. That night, I unplugged everything, phone, modem, power mains, even pulled the battery from the truck. Total blackout. I slept in the basement with a flashlight and the antenna dismantled beside me. No signals, no sound. Just silence. When I woke up, I was on the floor upstairs, sprawled in the hallway outside the bathroom. The door was open, the faucet running. My radio was reassembled and playing the loop at full volume. And someone had scrawled the word "returned" in the condensation on the bathroom mirror. I tried to retrace my steps, but my memory fractured. Whole blocks of time missing. Basic details, what I'd eaten, what I wore, gone. I opened my laptop to check the logs, only to find it had reset itself entirely. New user profile. Blank desktop. All my signal files were missing. What worried me most wasn't the lost data. It was the feeling that this wasn't an attack. It was a test. Something was seeing how far I'd go, how much I'd lose before I broke. And I was getting close.
I stopped calling them structures. It didn't feel right anymore. They weren't built. They were embedded, like something placed there before we knew how to look for it. Or maybe before we were meant to. I kept trying to document them, but
nothing stuck. Photos corrupted, videos played back distorted, sometimes showing angles I hadn't filmed. In one clip, I'm standing beside the cube, speaking. But I never said those words. My voice, yes. But the message was wrong, like it was reading from a script I hadn't written. The whispers had changed too. They weren't just fragments anymore. They were conversations. Names I recognized. My college roommate who died in a car accident 10 years ago. A woman I dated briefly after the divorce. My mother, alive and confused, asking where I was. None of them said anything directly, just scattered phrases looping between bursts of static. But the tone was always the same, urgent, like they were trying to warn me. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake somewhere else in the house. Once in the garage, keys in my hand, door wide open. Once outside, barefoot in the cold, mud on my arms like I'd been digging.
Again, but I hadn't been, not consciously. And every time the loop was playing somewhere nearby, not from the radio.
from the walls, the plumbing, the air vents. I filed FOIA requests to 4 different agencies disguising them as historical research. 3 came back blank, 1 came back partially redacted, referencing electromagnetic weather anomalies in the region I'd visited first. No mention of buried objects. But there was a note in the margin, handwritten, scanned faintly into the PDF. It said, "Do not pursue retention active." I tried contacting local news outlets, even a fringe podcast that covered signal interference and lost time phenomena. One reporter agreed to meet, but never showed. Her number disconnected the next day. The podcast episodes vanished from every platform. I found a backup mirror, but it was just white noise. Underneath it, if I listened closely, I could hear myself. Talking. Explaining everything. But I had no memory of ever recording it. By then, I had stopped pretending I could fix anything. The documents were useless. The recordings scrambled.
Overwritten. Every attempt I made to expose what was happening just fed it. My own voice kept showing up in places I never spoke.
I'd answer a phone call and hear myself on the other end, describing events I hadn't lived yet. In one call, I warned myself not to return to the original site. I sounded calm, resigned, like someone who had already lost. My mind began slipping in ways I couldn't track. I'd forget the names of basic tools, find old clothes in the closet that didn't belong to me, and lose time in blocks of hours. Entire days disappeared. I kept a notebook, but it filled itself with coordinates I didn't remember writing. The handwriting stayed consistent, but the pen changed. Pages would be torn out when I woke, burn marks along the edges. I visited the original site one last time. The land was the same, quiet, unchanged, but the structure had risen slightly. Not above the soil, but enough that I could see a thin black seam near the base. A line that hadn't been there before. I placed my hand on it. No response. No.
Just a deep, vibrating cold that passed through my skin like it knew I was different now. I recorded the visit, then watched the footage an hour later. In the video, I never touched the structure.
I stood 5 feet away, speaking softly, describing a memory I'd never had. Something about a schoolyard and a man watching me through binoculars. I rewound it 3 times. The memory grew clearer each time until it didn't feel like a recording anymore. It felt like remembering. That night I found photographs in a box I hadn't touched in years. Me as a child, standing in front of a chain-link fence. Behind me, a blurred figure. Same shape, same posture as the man I'd just described.
On the recording. I don't remember that day. I don't remember the picture being taken.
But when I flipped it over, a set of coordinates had been written in black ink. Same loop, different site. This time, I didn't hesitate. I knew where I was going. The final site was harder to reach, off an old gravel service road near the Nebraska-Kansas line, barely marked on any map. I drove through the night, guided only by the numbers. My hands trembled on the wheel, not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation, maybe. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find. Just that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The voice on the loop had stopped the night before. Total silence on every frequency. The absence felt louder than the signal ever had. The field was empty. No wind, no birds, no hum. The grass was low here, cut back by something. Not by man, not by weather. Just cleared. At the center stood the same cube. This one wasn't buried. It sat clean on the surface, like it had been waiting. Same dimensions, same seamless finish. It didn't reflect light exactly, it absorbed it. Standing in front of it, I felt smaller than I ever had. like whatever was inside had already seen me, already known me. I reached out and touched it, one pulse. That's all it took. No sound, no shock. Just a pressure behind my eyes and a sudden, impossible stillness. Then, clarity. My mind went blank, clean, like something had been wiped, selectively, carefully. I felt everything and nothing at once, not peace, not terror, just quiet. When I opened my eyes, I was in a small house I didn't recognize. Same town, but with a different name. There was a job I couldn't remember applying for. A neighbor who called me Mike. My past was gone. Divorce, forum threads, antennas, all erased. But in the garage, under a tarp, sat the same ham radio, clean, untouched, waiting. I sat with it for a long time, hours maybe. Then I turned it on. The loop wasn't there, just
static. Until, finally, a new signal cut through. A single line, calm, measured. Are you awake now? And I was. But not as Adam. Not as who I'd been. As something else.
I wasn't looking for Ashbrook Pines. I was looking for somewhere to be quiet. Burnout had left me twitchy and disconnected, drifting between contract gigs and late-night scrolling spirals. My name's Nora Ellison, and for most of my adult life, maps were the only thing that made sense. That's how it started, on Reddit. A thread about lost towns. One comment had an old NOAA satellite image from 1984. The poster said it looked fake. A perfectly symmetrical suburb outside Dayton.
Ohio, grids, cul-de-sacs, even a strip mall.
They said it wasn't on any modern map. Probably a labeling glitch, someone replied. But my eyes caught the name burned faintly into the scan. Ashbrook Pines. I know maps. I make them. And this one wasn't wrong. It was just missing. That's what caught me. Not the drama, just the absence. You don't forget a name like that when you've stared at cartography overlays for a living, especially not when it resurfaces in a 1983 Rand McNally road atlas you inherited from your father. I was cleaning out a closet when I found it, dog-eared and dust-dulled. Ashbrook Pines, right there, on page 76. 2 exits past Dayton. I blinked hard. It was marked like it had always been there. That's what did it. The mental break in pattern, not obsession, just a crack, a wrinkle in the map. I told myself it was harmless, just a curiosity. I traced the old highway number back on. OpenStreetMap, there was still a mile marker. Exit 62, no label, no ramp, just a blank sign. I stared at the street view for a long time. Barren trees, a stretch of earth behind a barrier fence. But the terrain didn't match the topography I'd modelled from that era. The elevation was wrong by a few meters, too smooth, like something
had been graded. That was the moment I felt it. My stomach sinking slightly, my breath shallower. Not fear, just a subtle wrongness, like you're hearing your name whispered in a silent room.
I reached for the atlas again. Ashbrook was still there. Stamped, permanent, like it refused to vanish quietly. I sat back in my chair, staring at a place that wasn't supposed to exist, and whispered the name like a question.
Ashbrook Pines. My father never talked much about Ohio, but that night I called him. My dad didn't answer right away. It rang until voicemail, then cut off. That wasn't unusual. His memory had been slipping for a while, names and places.
Drifting in and out like radio static. I tried again the next morning. This time he picked up. His voice was soft, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if it was really me. We talked for a few minutes, safe, shallow ground, until I brought up the atlas. I told him I found Ashbrook Pines marked just east of Dayton, asked if he remembered anything about it. There was a pause. Then he said, barely above a whisper, "We lived there once, didn't we?" My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked. He didn't answer directly, just said, "Your mother hated the soil, said the grass always came in too perfect, like plastic." Then he laughed quietly, like it was a joke he didn't quite understand. I tried pressing, but he drifted off topic, started asking if I'd called about his medication. That was the first crack in the wall. He'd never mentioned Ashbrook before, never talked about any town east of Dayton. The next day, I booked a rental car. I told myself it was just a field check, standard practice for freelance work. I drove west on I-70, watched the exit numbers climb. Mile 62 came fast. No name.
On the sign, just a faded green board with a blank panel and 2 bolts where letters should have been. The ramp was still there, barely.
Faded stripes, grass sprouting through the cracks, and a row of concrete barriers stretching across it like a line nobody was supposed to cross. I parked on the shoulder, stepped out, and walked toward the barrier. The air was heavy and still. Beyond the fence, thick tree cover swallowed the landscape, but I noticed something strange. The ground had a subtle grid pattern barely visible through the undergrowth, straight lines, right angles, nothing natural about them. My phone GPS showed no road, no anything, but I could hear it faintly underfoot. The way your tires hum when you're over old pavement buried by time. I pressed my palm to the barrier and waited. Nothing happened, but I didn't move. Something was still here, buried but not gone. When I got back to the motel that night,
I couldn't shake the sound.
it was so faint I thought I imagined it, a low vibration in my feet, like a subwoofer buried under the earth. I tried to record it, but the mic picked up nothing. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept looping through the images, those perfect angles in the dirt, the blank exit sign, my father's cracked voice. In the morning, I started digging again. Not out of obsession. I told myself it was still just curiosity. I posted a thread on a closed cartography forum asking if anyone remembered Ashbrook Pines. I got 2 replies. One user said they had a 1982 Garmin archive that showed faint street outlines east of Dayton, but the layers were corrupted and wouldn't export. Another mentioned an old Department of Transportation memo referencing something called Ashbrook. Utilities sector, dated June 1985. That phrase stuck with me. Utilities sector. It sounded like infrastructure, not a community. I searched archived government documents through a FOIA repository. Most were blacked out or redirected. Still, I found a partial FEMA index from 1986 listing a site labelled A Pines R07 under restricted zones. No details, no incident notes, just a lock symbol and a blank PDF. That was the moment something changed. This wasn't a mapping error. Someone had deliberately removed Ashbrook Pines, erased it at the system level. But systems leave residue. In a cached GIS tile from an old third-party server, I found the outline again, a perfect grid. It appeared for half a second before the overlay crashed and reset to present-day terrain. I screen captured the frame. I had something tangible now, a map that wasn't supposed to exist. I called my dad again that night. He answered but didn't sound like himself. I asked if he remembered our old backyard. There was a long silence. Then he said, "It backed up to the cul-de-sac. There were red curbs. You scraped your knee there once." I didn't respond. I never grew up in a cul-de-sac. Not in any place I remembered. He hung up before I could say another word. That's when the phone rang again. Unknown caller. A calm voice on the other end said, "You're triggering an archive event." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone screen long after the call ended. Archive event wasn't a phrase I recognized, but it didn't sound accidental. I backed up my files that night, map captures, GPS logs, my call recordings, and encrypted them to an offline drive. Then I ran a standard integrity scan on my GIS workstation. The results made my stomach drop. 3 project folders were corrupted, 2 had missing tiles, the third had been replaced entirely, with blank white maps named only X Ashbrook. I didn't remember naming them. I checked the metadata. The edit timestamps were from 3:17 a.m. I hadn't been awake. I told myself it could have been a sync error. But when I tried to open my audio notes from the phone call with my dad, the file refused to load. The waveform had been overwritten with a solid tone, like a flat line. I played it on loop just to be sure. 7 seconds of silence, then a faint, mechanical voice repeating one line. Return to origin. I hadn't recorded that. At least, not consciously. By noon, I'd reached out to a geologist I'd met on a contract job the year before. Her name was Valerie Tien. She specialized in karst terrain and subsurface collapse modeling. I sent her the grid overlay and asked her to look into sinkhole data from the Dayton area in the mid-80s. She responded within hours. There had been no public record of a sinkhole, but she found internal geological survey notes referencing a structural integrity breach east of Dayton in 1985, classified under non-natural causality. Valerie agreed to talk in person. We arranged to meet in Cincinnati 2 days later. That night I got another call. No voice this time. Just a low-frequency hum that felt physical, like pressure behind my eyes. I hung up. An hour later, my email client crashed. When it rebooted, my inbox was empty, not deleted, just gone like it had never existed. I tried logging into my GIS network account. Locked. Credentials flagged for violation. That's when I noticed something else. My name, as listed on the university credential page, had been changed. It still showed my photo, but the name beneath, it wasn't mine. It said Eleanor Nash. I had never used that name in my life. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking my ID, refreshing old logins, watching as pieces of my life slipped out of alignment. My GIS license was revoked. My credentials from the Regional Planning Board vanished. Even my LinkedIn account had been wiped, the profile photo replaced with a blank silhouette. The name Eleanor Nash showed up in more places now. Online directories, data archives, even my bank's security questions. I tried calling Valerie the next morning. Her number rang twice, then went silent. I left a voicemail. She never called back. By late afternoon, I drove to Cincinnati anyway. We were supposed to meet at a small cafe across from the university library. I waited for an hour, nursing a coffee that went cold in my hands. She didn't show. I texted her, then checked local news. A headline hit me like a punch. Geologist killed in car fire on I-75. No name listed, no photo, just pending investigation. The timestamp was 6 hours earlier. I knew it was her. I knew it, without needing proof. I walked back to my car in a fog. When I started the engine, my dashboard display flickered. For a second, the backup cam showed something it shouldn't have. Rows of houses in perfect symmetry, sunlit lawns, a sign that read, "Welcome to Ashbrook Pines." Then it blinked back to the normal feed, just concrete, cars and taillights. I shut off the engine and sat still. I didn't feel paranoid. I felt watched. That night, I uploaded a compressed archive of everything I had to a secure drop. and sent it to a niche urban exploration podcast. They were known for uncovering suppressed infrastructure stories. I added a simple message: verify the coordinates, FEMA Zone A Pines R07, look for buried asphalt. The next morning, I got a reply. It was an audio file. I hit play expecting a confirmation. Instead, I heard my own voice. Not a message I'd sent, but a clipped recording from a therapy session I barely remembered. I was talking about my father, about memory gaps, about a town I couldn't prove existed. The podcast had never received my files. Someone had intercepted them and replaced them with this. I didn't recognize the recording at first. My voice sounded distant, brittle. I was describing dreams I couldn't remember having. Cul-de-sacs with no end, streetlights flickering in broad daylight, a house number that changed every time I looked at it. The therapist's voice was calm, methodical, but I couldn't remember. The session. I scrubbed through the file. At the end, I said something that made my blood freeze. They buried us before we understood what we were part of. I shut the laptop and unplugged the power. I didn't trust anything connected to a network. The next day, I found my bank account inaccessible. Security lockout. When I called, they asked for a name I didn't recognize. My utilities auto-cancelled. My email was flagged for spam abuse. Everything normal in my life had turned brittle, hollowed out like I was being peeled away, layer by layer. I tried to work, opened my mapping software, loaded a fresh base layer, but every coordinate I entered returned an error. Location, not found. Even global landmarks, the program wouldn't let me map anything. I pulled old hard drives from storage, ones not connected to any cloud account. On one of them, buried in an archive folder I hadn't touched in years, was a batch of family photos. I opened the first. My father standing next to a picket fence. Something about the angle caught my attention. I zoomed in on the mailbox. 14.
Ashbrook Lane. I checked another photo. A backyard birthday. Kids playing near a swing set. In the background, barely visible, was a wooden sign. Ashbrook Pines Recreation Centre. My hands started shaking. These were photos I had seen before,
but never noticed the details. Somehow the evidence had always been there, camouflaged by routine memory. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile it all. If we had lived there, why did no one remember? Why was every trace sealed, deleted, rewritten? That night, I stopped trying to prove anything. I printed the photos, packed my tools, and drove back to the restricted site. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for the entrance. Whatever had been built there, whatever had been erased, was still humming under the surface. And I was ready to see it. The barriers at mile marker 62 looked the same, weathered, unmoved. But this time, I came prepared. Just before dawn, I parked a quarter-mile down the service road and cut through the woods with a thermal camera, ground sensor, and a flat spade. I moved slow, methodical, until the device picked up something unusual. A consistent heat drop, not natural, square-shaped, roughly the size of a storm hatch. I cleared the dirt with my hands, uncovering a steel panel flush with the ground. No
handle. Just a faint inscription at the corner. Property of us dept of relocation. Below that, a FEMA tag with the code APINES R07. I knocked twice, out of instinct. Nothing happened, but when I pressed my palm to the center, the panel clicked.
And released. A stale draft pushed up from below. I pulled the door open and climbed down a narrow ladder into cold air. The shaft was concrete, but near the bottom the walls changed. Smooth metal, windowless. I stepped out into a corridor that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The air buzzed with a low electronic pulse, like the whir of old CRT monitors. Around the corner, the hallway opened into a chamber that stopped me in my tracks. A replica neighborhood, sealed underground, identical homes, trimmed lawns, street signs labeled Ashbrook Pines. But everything was still, artificial, like a film set, paused mid-scene. I walked the cul-de-sac in silence. Then I heard it, a soft, looping audio track playing from a buried speaker somewhere beneath the grass. Ashbrook Pines, where memories live forever. In the window of one house, I saw a photo. My family, me as a child, holding a balloon I don't remember. My dad is beside me, smiling. The same picket fence, the same mailbox. I stared until my eyes blurred. The place had been preserved, not erased. A closed-loop memory archive, not a cover-up, a simulation, a test. I could have leaked everything, but I didn't. I backed up my findings, then sealed the hatch behind me. Some truths aren't meant to be exposed, they're meant to be understood. I still make maps, but now only for myself. I carry Ashbrook in my mind, where it can't be corrupted or deleted, not lost, just quiet. Her name was on the intake sheet that night. I saw it myself. 2 days later, it was like she never existed. My name's Marcus Eldon. I've been a paramedic for 15 years, but nothing in that job prepared me for what the storm took. They called it Hurricane Rhiannon, but it felt more like a test. I'd lived through 7 storms on the Gulf, 3 as a rookie, 4 as the guy they called when no one else would go back in. I'd seen houses split open like rib cages, water, black with engine oil and broken glass, but I'd never seen names disappear. My niece Talia was on the shelter manifest at Ascension High, row 22, last cot. I checked it myself when I dropped off supplies that night. She had a fever, asthma, but she was stable. My sister Cara was with her. 2 days later, Talia was gone. Not just missing, gone. Her name, her birth date, her signature on the intake sheet, all wiped like she'd never existed. And when I asked Cara where she was, she blinked like I'd said something cruel. "Who's Talia?" she asked. That's when everything cracked. I spent 3 days digging through FEMA's digital.
Logs, Ascension, Bell Chase, Barataria. No mention of Talia. No mention of 6 others I remembered from that shelter.
At first, I blamed stress, grief, the chaos of the storm. But each time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not in fear, just waiting. Like she knew I'd come looking. The break came on day 6. I found an old survivor database from Katrina, 2005, back before cloud backups and auto-sync. There was a thread archived on a mirrored server in Norway. Posts from evacuees whispering about people who vanished during the eye of the storm. "The chosen ones," one read. "They don't drown, they don't burn, they're taken." Most users were anonymous, a few dead links, but one name stuck with me, Siren Harvest. That's when I knew this wasn't grief. It wasn't trauma. It was something else. A pattern no one wanted to admit. And if the people in charge wouldn't ask questions, I would. I owed her that. And something in my gut told me this wasn't the first time. Not for Talia, not for me. I stopped sleeping after I found the thread. My body would lie down, but my mind stayed locked in the glow of my screen, following breadcrumb trails no one else seemed to notice. Talia's face kept flashing behind my eyelids, her crooked grin, that lime green hoodie she wore even in summer. I started combing shelter rosters from every major hurricane in the last 30 years. Most were clean, but here and there I'd find gaps. A missing page in a PDF, a batch of survivors listed one day, then gone the next. It wasn't enough to prove anything, not on its own. But when I filtered the names by blood type, a pattern started to form.
O negative, AB negative, rare groups too rare to ignore. And most were born on the same day, November the 2nd. That's what made my stomach turn. Talia was born that day too. I went looking for records at the hospital where she was born, St. Bernard Parish.
Their systems were ancient, barely holding together after the last flood. But I found her file, buried deep, AB negative, confirmed. That was when I knew I wasn't chasing ghosts. Something was being filtered. Not by accident, but by design. I thought about reaching out to someone, police, media, even old friends from paramedic training. But every scenario played out the same in my head. Blank stares, polite nods, and then the slow, quiet judgment. Maybe they'd even call Kara. Tell her I needed help. I didn't need help. I needed answers. The flash drive arrived 2 days later. No return address, just a padded envelope shoved under my door like a flyer. Inside was a cheap plastic stick, the kind you'd buy at a gas station. It booted up fast, one file, no password. Just a folder labelled siren footage. The first frame stopped my breath cold. The Ascension High gym, lit only by emergency lights, rain pounding outside. A line of hazmat-suited figures moved in silence, stepping over cots, lifting bodies. One of them, the third from the left, was wearing that lime green hoodie. Talia. She wasn't running. She wasn't screaming. She just stood there, then lifted slowly off the floor. And then she vanished, mid-air, like a light switched off. After watching the footage, I sat in the dark for hours, not thinking, not feeling, just breathing. The storm siren started up again around 3 a.m. No warnings, no alerts, just the low, mechanical wail echoing across the flooded streets. It wasn't forecasted, no storm system in sight. I looked outside, but the sky was clear. I knew it wasn't just me. A neighbour's porch light blinked on. Someone down the street shouted, but no one came outside. The sound went on for 6 minutes, then stopped like a switch had flipped. That was the first night I noticed my phone acting strange. Missed. Calls with no timestamps. Texts from unknown numbers that deleted themselves before I could read them. The worst was a voicemail that came in blank, just static. But it didn't play through the phone's speaker, it came through the Bluetooth in my truck, even though the keys weren't in the ignition. I started driving out to the hospital during my off hours. The night shift left the main servers unattended. I knew the system inside and out, and no one questioned me when I said I needed to back up trauma reports. I wasn't looking for trauma. I was looking for Talia's name in the system logs. I knew it wouldn't be there. But maybe something else would be. That's how I found the biometric filter. Hidden in the hospital's intake software was a legacy program called Siren. Buried under a dozen security protocols, it was set to flag patients with specific blood types, birth dates, and a biometric marker I couldn't identify. It was activated automatically during major weather events. That wasn't a glitch. It was policy. I printed the code string, stuck it in my glove compartment, and drove home with the windows down. I needed air, something real, but when I pulled into my driveway, the door to my apartment was cracked open. No damage, nothing missing, just open. I stepped inside and checked every drawer, every cabinet. Everything was in place. But I knew someone had been there. I could feel it. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. They didn't need to take anything. They just wanted me to know they could. I stopped sleeping again. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sirens. Not just outside, but in my head, low, metallic tones layered under static. I kept the lights off in the apartment, taped over the windows, unplugged the router. Nothing helped. One night I drove south toward the coastline. I didn't have a plan. I just followed the empty roads until the signal bars on my phone dropped to zero. That's when the man stepped into the road. He wasn't waving, just standing still, lit by my headlights. Long grey coat, ball cap, small pack on his back. I slowed, rolled down the window a few inches. "You're Marcus," he said. "Took you long enough." His name was Silas. Used to work for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Said he left after something called Phase Red Sky, a classified weather experiment that turned into something else. He didn't wait for me to believe him, just handed me a flash drive and said, "You want answers? Start here." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind sweep across the marsh. Then he said, "They don't need satellites anymore. They use ground-based microwave arrays to stimulate ionospheric turbulence. That's how they build the storms. Controlled chaos. They create the conditions, then open the doors." "Doors?" I asked. He looked at me like I already knew. "The lightning, the pressure drop, the electrical field. It's not just weather. It's a key. They're not natural storms, they're triggers. The extractions happen during the eye. No resistance, just light and noise and then nothing." I asked why the targets were always rare blood types. He shrugged. "Something in the genetics, compatibility maybe. Some think they're collecting data, others think it's more." He paused, then added, "We used to track anomalies. Then we were told to stop. Records got sealed. People started disappearing. Engineers, doctors, analysts. No obituaries, no family notices. Just gone. Silas wouldn't let me take his picture, wouldn't give me a phone number. Before I left, he said, they're not done. Another storm's building. You'll feel it before the forecast shows it. Don't trust what they report. Trust the static." Then he walked back into the dark, and I drove away with the file burning a hole in my dashboard. I spent the next 3 days inside, blinds drawn, watching the same video clips over and over. Silas's flash drive was encrypted, but the main folder opened without a password. Inside were weather pattern overlays, electromagnetic scan data, and audio logs tagged with dates and locations. One folder stood out, voices. The files were distorted, full of static and hum, but each contained a voice describing the same thing: people vanishing during storms. A woman from Galveston, a man from Tampa, a medic from Puerto Rico. All different years, same story. Loved ones gone, no wreckage, no remains, just erased. One clip had a name, Lauren Chappelle. I ran it through old FEMA correspondence. She'd filed a report after Hurricane Michael, claiming her son disappeared during the eye. The report was flagged, then closed. Reason: psychological trauma. No follow-up. No response. I tried calling the number listed. Disconnected. I tried the address.
Vacant. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. People like me had been looking for years.
They either went silent or were silenced. Silas wasn't an outlier. He was a warning. By the fourth night, I couldn't sit still. I met with a local journalist named Ayla Chang. We talked in her car outside a shuttered library. I showed her the FEMA anomaly reports, the video, the siren filter code. She didn't flinch, just took notes, asked smart questions, said she'd seen similar threads in old investigative drafts that were pulled before publishing. If this is real, she said, we're looking at systemic abductions hidden by engineered disasters. She agreed to run a piece, carefully sourced, buried in a wider climate story. We planned to meet again the next day. She never showed. I called twice. Then again. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I drove by her place. Lights off, mail piling up. No sign of a struggle, just absence. Same as always. That night I got an email from her address. No text. Just a blank subject line and one attachment. A weather radar loop showing a new system building off the coast. It was slow, dense, and growing fast. No name yet, but I knew. I could feel it in my chest before I even looked outside. Another storm was coming. The new system was officially named Hurricane Midas within 48 hours. Forecast models called it a fast-forming anomaly, with landfall expected by the weekend. I knew better. This wasn't natural. The air felt wrong, thick, charged, too quiet. I walked through my neighborhood and noticed every radio, every TV, every phone warning the same thing: evacuate. But it wasn't panic they were pushing. It was compliance. The routes were limited, checkpoints strict, and FEMA trucks were already stationed in places the storm hadn't touched yet. By Friday, I lost access to the hospital network. My badge stopped working. No warning, no notice, just revoked. When I tried logging in remotely, my IP was blocked. Then came the knock. Two men, clean suits, no IDs, said they were with emergency services and asked if I'd recently tried to access restricted systems. I didn't answer. They left without forcing it, but one of them leaned close as he turned away. People who chase ghosts usually end up as one. Then they walked off, calm as ever. I left that night with just a bag. No car, no phone. I'd memorized the drone flight paths from the footage Silas gave me. They always circled near FEMA's restricted zones during the eye. I mapped them against the projected path of Midas and found a location that lined up with every pattern: an abandoned subdivision outside Port Sulphur. No active grid, no cameras, just empty streets and waterlogged houses. I slipped past the outer cordons on foot during the first landfall surge.
Rain hit sideways, wind ripping low branches loose, but the sirens hadn't started yet. I moved fast, ducking behind debris and fences until I reached the cul-de-sac marked in red on the map. That's when I heard it. Not thunder, not wind.
A low, pulsing tone that vibrated through my chest. The same pitch as the voicemail static. I followed it. Then I saw them, figures in suits moving like clockwork under the glow of portable floodlights. At their center, a white cargo van with no plates and a single antenna rising from the roof. The sirens wailed once, sharp and sudden, and every figure turned at the same time. Not toward the storm, toward me. They didn't speak, just moved, in perfect sync, boots splashing through shallow water, eyes hidden behind black visors. I didn't run. I couldn't. The siren's frequency buzzed through my spine, holding me in place. One of them raised a scanner, a small rectangular device with no markings. A blue light passed over me. For a second, nothing happened. Then the nearest figure lowered his arm and nodded once toward the van. They parted, creating a path. I stepped.
Forward slowly, heart pounding, unsure whether I was surrendering or being chosen.
The door to the van opened on its own. Inside was a sterile chamber, white walls lit from within. No seats, no controls, just a slot in the center panel with a blinking red outline. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the blood sample. I'd taken weeks ago, mine sealed in a small vial. I don't know why I brought it. Maybe I always knew I'd end up here. I placed it in the slot. The light turned green. Behind me, the storm intensified. Trees bowed sideways, transformers exploded in the distance, But the cul-de-sac remained untouched, silent, controlled. Then it happened. One by one, figures began lifting into the air, slowly, steadily, as if gravity had been reprogrammed. A beam of pale light shone from above the clouds, shimmering through the rain. The figures rose into it, vanishing one after another. No engines, no sound, just disappearance. When it was my turn, I felt weightless before I left the ground. There was no fear, only clarity.
I looked down one last time and saw the houses, the flooded streets, the wreckage of a world that had buried the truth beneath storms. Then everything went white. They said I drowned. That's what the report would show. Marcus Eldon, paramedic.
Widower, mental health casualty, lost in the surge, but someone's been posting again. Small leaks, weather anomalies.
Old FEMA maps, extraction points marked in red. A new thread started last week on a forgotten server. The name caught my eye. Siren Harvest Log, phase continuum. I'm not coming back, but someone else will find this. And when they do, they'll...
No, enlightenment isn't safety. It's accepting we were never in control. You ever wake up not knowing your name, but somehow knowing the exact pressure it takes to snap a man's neck? That's where this started. I came to on a splintered park bench in DuPont Circle, cold, jittery, and wrong. Everything around me felt real, but detached, like I was watching it all through frosted glass. In my coat pocket, a laminated card, John Keller. I turned the name over in my head like a foreign coin. It didn't fit. People call me John Keller, at least that's what the card in my pocket says. But it doesn't sit right in my bones. The wallet was clean, too clean, no cash, no cards, just a folded train ticket to L'Enfant Plaza and a cheap prepaid phone with no contact. I wandered, dazed, through the city until a patrol car slowed at the curb. I hadn't done anything wrong, just walking, but the cop locked eyes with me like he knew something. He took my ID, scanned it, then stiffened. No questions, no warnings, just handed it back and drove off. Minutes later, the phone buzzed. Asset null acknowledged. Resume protocol. That's when I stopped walking. I ducked into a transit station bathroom, locked the stall, and stared at the message. My hands trembled, not from fear, but familiarity. Like muscle memory, waking up. I opened the phone's diagnostics, found hidden logs, remote access traces, command line pings routed through old military IPs. It wasn't just a burner, it was a leash. Still dazed, I rode the metro south, trying to think. Bits of memory flickered like dying light bulbs. White rooms, metal trays, someone speaking Russian while I counted backward in Spanish. An old man's voice murmuring, "Null must never surface." What the hell had I been? Who had I been? I exited near the Federal Triangle and found a public access terminal. FBI Field Office database. I don't know how I remembered the back door. Login, but I did. Searched Keller John, then asset null. That's when the floor dropped out. A redacted file, unacknowledged asset, MCultra 2.0, listed as retired, mentally unstable, presumed dead after a classified op in Bolivia. Termination date 2017, but that was impossible. I was standing right there, breathing, awake, or was I? My reflection in the dark glass showed a stranger, too clean, too controlled. That's when the question hit me harder than anything else.
Had yet? If I wasn't supposed to exist, who had brought me back?
I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a motel room on New York Avenue, lights off, curtains drawn, the bathroom fan running to mask ambient noise. The phone that had sent me the message was now disassembled, its battery sealed in a foil-lined envelope. My hands worked on instinct, methodically destroying trackers and building barriers. Something in me knew exactly what to do, even if I didn't know why. Around 3 a.m., I traced the first safe house. Not one from memory, but from muscle. Or the coded string buried in the FBI terminal's logs led to an old metro blueprint, a transfer corridor closed for renovation 10 years ago. I followed the map on foot, staying in shadows, watching reflections in every window and glass panel for tails. No one followed, but I didn't trust what I couldn't see. The door was disguised behind an access panel. I popped it open with a screwdriver, stepped into the dark, and found myself in a narrow hallway layered in dust and silence. At the end, a reinforced door. The keypad was ancient, but my fingers entered the code without hesitation. Inside, a cold room waited. Dust on the floor, but the air was clean. A generator rumbled faintly through the wall. The place had been used recently. On the table was a small cache, water, protein bars, burner phone, sealed folders marked with black triangles. One envelope was addressed to Keller. I hesitated, then opened it.
Inside were 4 photographs. People, civilians, each labelled with dates and locations. I recognized none of them, but my stomach turned as I stared. One image triggered something, a flash of light, a hotel lobby, someone whispering in my ear.
A woman crying. Then nothing. I dropped the photo and stepped back. The safe house had no mirrors, no cameras, no clocks. It was meant to isolate. But behind the walls, faint clicks echoed. I pressed my ear to the concrete. It wasn't plumbing, it was patterned, like Morse code. I recorded it, played it back, slowed it down. The same sequence repeated every 14 seconds. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew where to go next. There were more of these places. Someone had left a trail, and I was meant to follow it. The second safe house was buried beneath a shuttered church in Anacostia, its entrance hidden behind a warped panel in the basement boiler room. I reached it just after dawn, slipping through back alleys with a baseball cap pulled low and a bandage taped over the barcode tattoo I found on my forearm. The keypad code worked on the first try. Inside, the space was tighter than the first. Concrete walls, a single cot, and another file folder left on a steel table. This time there was a map, hand-marked with red ink, showing locations across. DC each point was connected with faint lines and short notes. One word repeated near several intersections. Resonance. In the corner of the map was a symbol I'd seen before. A triangle inside a circle, etched into the back of one of the photos from the previous safe house. I followed the marked path later that day, wearing thrifted clothes and carrying only analog gear. The route led me past 5 intersections in the city's northwest quadrant. Every one of them had traffic cameras, standard models on the surface. But when I used the frequency scanner from the safe house, each camera emitted the same pulse as the one I recorded earlier. A high-frequency burst, too fast for the human ear. My analog receiver showed the same signature each time. The signal wasn't random, it was timed. Precisely 14 seconds apart, always in sync with the others. By nightfall, I had a pattern. A grid. Someone was using the city's infrastructure to broadcast something. I didn't know what yet. I only knew my brain responded to it. Every time I passed through the signal field, I felt it. Tightness behind the eyes, a brief dizziness, a flicker of something just out of reach, a word I almost remembered, a name I couldn't place. At one corner, I caught myself mouthing syllables
I didn't understand, foreign, rehearsed, like I'd spoken them before.
I left that intersection shaken, gripping a lamppost to steady myself. This wasn't surveillance, it was manipulation, a system buried in plain sight built to interact with people like me, nulls, assets, or something worse. I found the third, safe house in a maintenance tunnel beneath the old Watergate complex. Getting in required an old Metro access badge and a code that came to me while I slept. Not a dream, exactly, more like a transmission. A faint voice reciting numbers in my head until I woke up gasping. The door led to a narrow room with exposed wiring and a humming server stack patched into what looked like broadcast equipment. On the desk was a single object, a worn VHS tape labeled Rescript Internal Trial. I found an old TV in the corner, plugged the tape in, and sat down. What played was a news segment from the early 2000s, but something was wrong. The anchor blinked too slowly. The background warped at the edges. A tone, barely audible, ran beneath the footage. At first I felt nothing. Then I lost time. I came to an hour later, sitting in the same spot, but the tape had rewound. My hands were shaking. I checked the watch. I'd blacked out for 53 minutes. On the wall behind me, I'd written something. A phrase in red marker, repeating across the concrete like a chant. The signal is not the message, it is the mold. My handwriting, but I didn't remember writing it. I recorded myself watching the tape again. This time, I stayed conscious. The signal embedded in the video wasn't just a sound, it was structured. A pattern that activated something in me. I recognized it from the camera pulses. But now I knew its purpose. The signal didn't track me, it changed me. I ran tests using analog equipment, filtering the audio through spectrum analysis. The signal repeated across public broadcasts, buried inside commercials, cartoons, even station IDs. No one would notice unless they were looking. And someone had built an entire framework to deliver it, citywide, daily, and with surgical precision. That's when it clicked. This wasn't surveillance, it was behavioral rewriting, dream conditioning, media as a weapon. Rescript wasn't a theory, it was real, and I'd been part of it. Maybe I still was. I stared at my reflection in the TV screen, barely recognizing my own face. The signals weren't hunting me, they were maintaining me, keeping the version of myself they'd built. I left the Watergate tunnel before sunrise, blood humming with adrenaline. The city felt different now, thinner, like a backdrop pulled, tight over something pulsing underneath. I avoided cameras, walked alleys, slept in shifts inside old boiler rooms or transit terminals. My analog laptop, air-gapped, copper-shielded, became my anchor. I fed it hours of recorded signal data, looking for origin points, irregularities, anything outside the known spectrum. Patterns emerged. Every signal spike matched with certain broadcast timestamps, 3 kids' shows, a weather update, and a late-night ad for antidepressants. Different networks, same frequency, same modulation curve. Someone was injecting these signals with military precision, using media as a neural delivery system, and I was still on the receiving end. 2 days later, I found a hacker collective in a decommissioned office near the Navy Yard. Off-grid types, ex-military, paranoid, smart. I showed them the waveform. One of them, a woman named Lux, stared at it and muttered, "This isn't modulation, it's entrainment." She explained how brainwave synchronization could be forced using external rhythms. Sound, light, even motion. She ran my scans through her gear and confirmed what I already feared. The signal was designed to reshape thought patterns. The human brain wasn't just reacting, it was adjusting. And mine, Lux said, was deeply attuned. "You've been mapped," she said. "Probably years ago, they used you as a template." That night, I checked my body in the mirror. found another scar. I didn't remember. Fresh, barely closed, just under my ribcage. A tiny incision. Clean. I didn't know what had been placed or removed. Panic hit hard. I tore through old belongings, notes, anything left behind in earlier safe houses. I found a black pill taped to the underside of one drawer. No label. Just a time stamp. 2017. I remembered Bolivia. Not the mission, but the room. White walls. Cold tile. A voice saying, "Null's loop is unstable." I dropped the pill and backed away. My hands were shaking. My ears rang. When I looked up, I saw myself in the mirror again. But it wasn't just me. Something behind my eyes had changed. Not fear, not confusion, something deeper, like I'd reached the edge of my own programming. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of that borrowed room, staring at the black pill until the light outside shifted from grey to gold. I thought about taking it, ending whatever loop I was in. But something deeper told me it wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to reset me, to wipe whatever progress I'd made. I sealed it in foil and flushed it down a subway vent. If I was breaking free, I needed the cracks to stay open. The next day, I returned to the third safe house, the one beneath. Watergate. I needed to see the tape again, needed to know if it would still affect me. But when I arrived, the door was already ajar. Inside, everything had been stripped. The VHS tape was gone. The equipment wiped. Even the signal recorder I left behind had been smashed. On the wall, someone had written one line in a different hand, "Kill the echo inside you." My stomach turned. Someone knew I was getting close. I moved quickly, burned every trace of my presence, then headed for the museum district. If someone was pulling strings, that's where they'd corner me. Public, monitored, controlled. It happened in the East Wing bathroom of the National Portrait Gallery. A man was waiting by the mirror, late 50s, government haircut, pale scar, down his temple. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me through the glass and nodded, as if confirming I was still viable. Then he handed me a pistol. "No sound," he said. "If you hear the tone, pull the trigger. Don't hesitate. That's the failsafe." I stared at the gun, then at him. He nodded again. "You were part of a second stage asset split. You're not the only version. One of you went rogue, one is still active, one was shut down. We don't know which you are." He stepped back, vanishing into the crowd before I could speak. I walked outside in a daze, the pistol heavy in my coat. I didn't hear the tone, but for the first time I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The truth had fractured. Maybe I was the original. Maybe I was the glitch. Maybe I was just the echo and the deletion order had finally arrived. I left DC the next morning. No buses, no trains. I walked 40 miles west before I found a back-road mechanic who didn't ask questions and took cash. The car he sold.
Me barely ran, but it was enough. I kept moving, avoiding towns, staying off the grid.
I didn't know what I was running from anymore. Handlers, clones, echoes, or myself. At night, I slept in the woods. By day, I recorded. I used the analog laptop to cut together a message. Not a rant, not a warning, just facts, the signals, the infrastructure, the frequencies, everything I'd found stitched into a single file. It wasn't polished, but it was true. I titled it Manifest Null, and the moment it was done, I uploaded it to every unsecured relay I could access. Pirate, servers, forgotten FTPs, old forums. Then I powered down the machine and left it in a creek. For weeks I heard nothing. I moved deeper into Virginia, living out of a shed near an old broadcast tower. No signal reached me out there. The silence was sharp, clean. At first, I mistook it for peace. Then came the dreams. Not fragmented memories, new ones. Clear, ordered,
instructional. I'd wake reciting phrases I didn't understand, phrases I had recorded weeks earlier in the city. It hadn't left me.
Whatever they'd done, whatever they'd built into my head, it was still running. I wrapped the tower in mesh, grounded everything I could, but it didn't matter. The signal was internal now. One night, I saw a red light in the sky, drone pattern, grid search. I knew they were sweeping for me. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I filmed. A single take. I looked into the camera and told the story, calmly, like a man who had nothing left to lose. I explained how the project began, how the signals spread, how the dream wasn't metaphor, it was software. And in the final seconds, I said the one thing I knew to be true. You think you're awake because you're not dreaming, but the dream is the part they built. That footage aired once. Late night cable, scrambled, distorted. But enough people saw it, enough to know. Enlightenment didn't bring peace, it brought choice. And for the first time, I made mine. They said the Cold War left ghosts in Alaska. I found something worse, something that's still alive. My name's Tara Ung. I used to track drone anomalies for the military until Echo Base got me fired. I first saw the video while half asleep, in my apartment outside Spokane, watching old uploads from a survivalist channel I used to follow. Mason Reeve, the guy behind it, had a knack for pushing too far. But this one was different. Titled, Found Something Strange at the Edge of Nowhere. It was barely watchable, just blizzards and breath and static. But there was a single frame where the wind pulled back long enough to show it. A vertical black shape rising out of the snow like a burn mark on the world. No texture, no explanation. The footage cut off 30 seconds later. 2 days after that, Mason disappeared. His subscribers lit up, speculating everything from a bear attack to a staged stunt. But then the video itself vanished, not removed by him but scrubbed by the platform. A violation, they said, no appeal. I'd seen weird things working military recon, spook projects, surveillance records no one talked about, but nothing stuck with me like that shape, because it wasn't just a shape. Back in 2013, before my clearance got yanked, I saw an early version of an NSA map, deep signal markers layered over Arctic permafrost. One was flagged Echo Base, no coordinates, no mission ID, just a red zone labeled non-recoverable. The same spot Mason's GPS metadata pointed to once some genius on Reddit decrypted a blurred frame. And that was it. I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was guilt for how I left the job. Maybe it was Mason. Or maybe it was the quiet dread that I already knew what he'd found. I packed in silence, told no one, joined the digital crew heading up.
There, just 4 of us. 3 days into the hike, and I already felt it, like the air was holding its breath. We found his camp abandoned, tent collapsed.
Camera smashed clean, almost surgically. No card inside. Just a perfect emptiness, the kind you don't walk away from. Something was here, and it hadn't left. By the 4th day, our radio lost all range. We weren't surprised. Terrain-like. This eats signal, but the timing felt wrong. 1 minute we were checking coordinates, the next everything went dead. No static, no error, just silence. We tried backup batteries, fresh antenna placement. Nothing. Greg, our medic, said it was solar interference. I didn't believe that. The air didn't feel solar. It felt saturated, pressurized, like we were walking through a sealed dome. That night, We made camp near a frozen creek just east of Mason's last geotag. There were 4 of us. Me, Greg, Jules, our geospatial guy, and Len, a quiet systems engineer who barely spoke unless asked. By then we'd stopped talking much anyway. The cold got into our mouths, made words feel like waste. We boiled snow for water, rationed dried food, and watched the sky. No stars, just shifting cloud bands that moved too fast, and in patterns I'd never seen. It was Len who heard it first. Around midnight, he woke us without a word and pointed uphill. Something was moving, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not wind, not snow, footsteps almost. We killed our lanterns and listened. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. Whatever it was, it didn't come close, but it didn't move away either, just paced back and forth, just out of view. When the sun came up, nothing was there.
No tracks, no prints, just smooth snow. Jules wanted to turn back, said this wasn't what we signed up for. I reminded him Mason was still missing. Greg said nothing. Len stared at the ridge. I decided we'd keep going, another half-day hike.
Maybe less, and we'd reach the edge of the anomaly zone. That was my name for it. The place where Mason's path cut hard northeast, toward the black shape in the videos. The map showed nothing there, no landmarks, no elevation contours. Just a flat expanse labelled with a survey code I didn't recognize. We packed quickly. No one said much. As we broke camp, a bird passed overhead, only it wasn't a bird, too symmetrical, too still. I watched it glide without flapping once, then vanish behind the ridge. Drones don't usually bother with camouflage, but that one did. We reached the ridge by midday. Wind pushed hard against us, but we pressed through. The landscape flattened into a wide basin, coated in snow, so smooth it looked untouched by weather. No rocks, no trees. Just a shallow depression, maybe half a mile wide, perfectly symmetrical. It felt artificial, like something had been cleared, not by hand, but by process. Like heat or pressure had erased the terrain's history. My breath caught as I scanned the horizon. There, near the far edge, the spire rose into view. It wasn't tall, maybe 20 feet, but it looked taller because nothing surrounded it. Matty black, no reflection. Its surface absorbed light rather than casting shadow. Up close, it wasn't a spire at all. It curved slightly, broader at the base, narrowing toward the top. No seams, no markings. Just solid geometry set into the permafrost. Greg reached out to touch it, but I stopped him. It didn't feel safe, not in a superstitious way, more like instinct warning you before the ground gives. We set up camp on the edge of the basin about 200 yards from the structure. Jules took soil samples. Len ran a frequency scan using his modified field laptop. I kept watch. The sky was still. The air didn't move. Sound felt muted, like someone had dialed down the volume of the world. After sunset, the cold worsened, but we stayed near the fire, speaking in short, clipped sentences. Something about the place made it hard to relax. Every sound behind us felt closer than it should have. At some point, I noticed Jules wasn't at his tent. I called his name once. No answer. Greg and I spread out with headlamps circling wide around the camp. We found him 20 minutes later, barefoot in the snow, facing the spire. He didn't respond at first, just stared ahead, lips moving faintly. When we pulled him back, he resisted weakly, whispering numbers in a pattern none of us recognized. The digits didn't stop until he fell asleep, and even then, his mouth kept twitching, like he was still counting. That night, none of us slept. Not really. The quiet wasn't quiet anymore. It was loaded, like waiting for a response we couldn't name. At first light, we checked the gear. Jules was awake, but quiet, wrapped in a thermal blanket, eyes tracking things that weren't there. He didn't remember leaving the tent. Couldn't explain the numbers, just kept blinking like the light hurt. Greg ran a vitals check. No fever, no frostbite. But Jules's pulse was irregular, like his body was caught in two rhythms at once. We gave him water and left him to rest while the rest of us moved toward the spire. The closer we got, the more the air shifted. It wasn't colder, just heavier. A pressure behind the ears, like descending in an airplane with no cabin balance. Len's instruments picked up low-frequency pulses, barely above the noise floor, but too regular to be natural. We circled the base, looking for a seam or an entry point. There was nothing visible, but then Len stopped and pointed. The snow just in front of the structure wasn't snow. It was ash-white frost, thin and brittle. Beneath it, the ground wasn't ice. It was metal, flat, textured, and stamped with grid lines we couldn't decipher. We started clearing the surface. After about 10 minutes, a shape emerged, a circular outline, maybe 6 feet across, centered under the spire's overhang. Greg knocked on it. The sound was deep, hollow, like tapping the lid of a buried tank. We stepped back. Nothing happened at first. Then a faint vibration passed under our
boots. The circle depressed slightly, hissed once, and split open into a sloped tunnel descending into darkness.
Len activated his shoulder light. The walls were smooth, lined with panels that absorbed the beam instead of reflecting it. The air was dry, sterile. We descended slowly, one step at a time, each footfall echoing too long. After 20 yards, the tunnel opened into a chamber, cold, wide, and silent. What we found inside didn't match any architecture. It wasn't built, it was grown. Along the far wall were tanks, 6 of them, filled with pale fluid suspended in metal racks. Inside each floated a shape, roughly human in size but not quite right. Elongated limbs, no hair, eyes closed. One of them twitched as we entered. Greg whispered the only thing any of us were thinking. What the hell did Mason find? The chamber smelled faintly metallic, like ozone after a storm. We stood in silence, staring at the 6 tanks. Their surfaces were matte, not glass, but some kind of synthetic membrane. Fluid moved slowly inside, thick and clear, with suspended particles that caught and bent the light in unnatural ways. The figures weren't asleep. They were dormant, waiting. Their skin was smooth, pale grey with no visible veins or pores. No mouths. Just 2 oversized eyes sealed shut beneath transparent
lids.
They looked almost fetal, but too developed, too human. I moved closer, scanning each tank, trying not to breathe too loud. Len took readings, shaking his head at every result. "No known genome markers," he whispered. "The cell structures are synthetic, lab-grown, but not by any method I recognize." Greg was already photographing everything. He turned to one of the consoles along the wall, brushing away a thin layer of dust. The screen lit up without power. Blue symbols flickered across it. Not language, patterns, repeating sequences. Some matched the digits Jules had whispered in his sleep. Then we found the file cabinet, sealed behind a thin sheet of curved metal. Len pried it open with a multi-tool. Inside were folders, real paper, sealed in vacuum-tight plastic. Printed photographs, charts, handwritten notes in English. It made no sense. Something this alien paired with something so analog. I flipped through one file and froze. The photo was of a child, maybe 6 years old. Dark hair, pale eyes, staring blankly into the camera. I'd seen him before, not in person, but online. It was Mason, 10 years ago. The file listed a birth date that didn't match public records. Test subject 047, accelerated growth cycle noted, synthetic genome, hybrid class. Below that, a signature, blurred but legible enough to make out the agency's seal. Not military, not civilian. Just a 3-letter code I'd seen only once in a restricted archive. It wasn't supposed to exist. Greg looked over my shoulder and said nothing. His hands shook. We backed away slowly from the file drawer, as if our presence alone could trigger some kind of response. The chamber remained silent. But one of the tanks was empty now. None of us had seen it open, though we'd all looked away for just a moment when the console activated. That moment was enough. We counted again, 5 occupied tanks, 1 vacant, no signs of damage, no fluid leak. The membrane was intact, yet something had left. Greg backed toward the tunnel, his voice low and tight. "We need to leave, now." I agreed, but Len hesitated. He was still at the console, fingers moving across the panel like something had taken hold of him. "It's still transmitting," he muttered. "The symbols, it's a handshake protocol. Something's answering back." I stepped beside him and reached for his arm. "Shut it down." He didn't move, just kept tracing patterns. The screen shifted again. Now it showed a map, topographic but unfamiliar. Not Alaska.
Not Earth. Coordinates scrolled at the bottom, along with timestamps counting upward. Len whispered, "They're sinking." Then we heard footsteps. Slow, unsteady, crunching faintly on the tunnel floor. Jules appeared in the entrance, barefoot, eyes wide. He shouldn't have known how to find us. He shouldn't have made it this far alone. His eyes were solid black, reflecting no light.
He pointed at the console and said, in a voice not fully his own, "It's awake. You shouldn't be here." Greg moved fast. He grabbed Jules by the arm and pulled him back toward the tunnel. Jules didn't resist. He just kept speaking. But the words weren't English anymore. They were rhythmic, almost melodic, repeating phrases that matched the sequence Len had recorded earlier. The spire wasn't just a structure, it was a relay. And Jules somehow had become a conduit. We reached the tunnel entrance, and I turned back one last time. The tanks had gone dark. The chamber lights were dimming, one by one. Something deeper below us had started to hum, a rising frequency we couldn't hear, but felt like pressure behind our eyes. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew the truth then. Echo Base wasn't abandoned, it was waking up. We made it out just before nightfall. The tunnel sealed behind us without a sound. One moment it was open, the next it was gone, just smooth frost again, undisturbed, no seams, no hinges. The spire stood silent, but something beneath it had shifted. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere just before lightning strikes. Jules collapsed once we cleared the basin. Greg checked his vitals. Normal, but his eyes remained black. He stopped speaking. Just stared ahead, lips moving in silent repetition. We carried him back to the camp in silence. That night I tried to send a burst signal from our satellite phone. As soon as I powered it on, the screen flashed white and rebooted. All data wiped, not corrupted, erased. Our backups were dead, batteries drained without use. Even lens gear was unresponsive. Everything that had recorded what we found was gone. We weren't just cut off, we were being erased, like the base had anticipated our every move. Greg tried to hike out before sunrise, said he'd go ahead, make contact, get help. He didn't return. We found only his pack, half buried in fresh snow. No prints, no trail. Just a static hiss on the portable radio that hadn't worked since day 2. I made the decision then I'd go back alone. I took the burner phone hidden in my coat, the one they hadn't known I'd brought, and climbed to the only place with any chance of signal, an exposed ridge just above the spires. Basin. I recorded a message. My voice was steady, but something in me had shifted. It felt rehearsed, like I wasn't deciding what to say. I was remembering. I kept it short, said only what mattered. Then I pressed upload and waited. The moment the file sent, the sky dimmed. No weather, just shadow, like something passed overhead that left no shape. I turned back toward camp, but I already knew no one else had made it. Weeks later, in Anchorage, I watched my video surface online. It lasted 3 hours before being pulled, but by then it had been mirrored, archived, re-uploaded by strangers I'd never met. My voice was calm, my eyes too wide. I remember what I said because it didn't feel like a warning, it felt like an announcement. Echo Base isn't abandoned, it's expanding, and we were never the dominant species. The last thing. The video caught was my reflection in the lens. I was smiling, but not like me. I haven't seen Len or Jules since. I don't expect to. The funding behind Echo ran too deep to be traced. I've moved 3 times, changed names twice, but the quiet is gone now. Sometimes I still hear that pulse, low and regular, like a heartbeat coming from beneath the snow. I don't sleep much anymore. You don't question old maps until one makes you question everything. Mine was dated 1973, buried in a zoning archive that hadn't been touched in decades. My name's Ben Holloway, and for 12 years I've audited land use surveys like some people do crossword puzzles, quietly and mostly alone. I was 2 hours into a routine audit, cross-referencing land use near the Utah-Nevada border, when I found it, an annotated USGS chart showing something I'd never seen before, a gridded urban layout in the middle of blank desert, roads, districts, infrastructure. The legend labeled it as Proposed Statehood Echelon Territory. I stared at it, convinced it was a training mock-up or some Cold War urban warfare simulation. That happened sometimes. Provisional cities penciled in for war games, then forgotten. But something about this one stuck. It wasn't just the level of detail, it was the civic center, meticulously laid out, complete with zoning codes, utility, corridors, and something called the administrative meridian. I logged the anomaly and cross-checked the area using current satellite data. Nothing matched. The present-day terrain looked undisturbed, but there were hints. Faint rectilinear shadows across the desert floor, barely visible unless you toggled, infrared overlays or used high-angle lighting, patterns too symmetrical for erosion, too consistent for coincidence. I flagged it for escalation and submitted a review ticket. 3 days later, my remote access was revoked with no explanation. The help desk cited a routine security patch. My laptop rebooted overnight and came back scrubbed. New OS, new encryption protocols. A co-worker I'd asked to double-check the grid pattern sent me a single word text. Don't. Then he quit the next day. No goodbye. No exit memo. Just gone. That's when it started. The creeping tension. Like waiting for a sound that never arrives. Emails stopped reaching their recipients. Old file paths came back blank. My phone began logging calls I hadn't made, time-stamped during hours I was asleep. It was subtle at first, just noise, but it built slowly, methodically, until I could feel the weight of something just outside the frame. I stopped trusting screens. I started printing everything, storing backups in metal tins under the floorboards. That's what paranoia does. It teaches you ritual. It gives you structure when reality begins to fray at the edges. I didn't tell anyone I was driving out there. I just packed a bag, left the office key under my monitor, and headed west on Route 50 until the signal bars on my phone vanished for good. The coordinates from the old map pointed to a patch of desert between two dry riverbeds, maybe 60 miles.
Off any maintained road. It took most of a day to reach the edge, another hour creeping across sand and rock until the rental car gave up. I hiked the rest. When I arrived, there was nothing. No fences, no ruins, no trace of the grid I'd seen on the map, just red dust and heat shimmering off the horizon. I stood still, listening. Even the wind seemed cautious.
I walked the site until dusk, checking compass bearings and pacing the outline where the central district should have been. Nothing but silence. I was ready to give up when the sun dipped behind the hills. That's when I saw it. Small points of light rising from the ground like the desert was exhaling. Not flares, not headlights. They came in lines, evenly spaced, forming intersections and long corridors of light exactly where the map had shown streets. The effect was faint, like distant LEDs seen through fog. I moved closer, but every time I approached a point, it dimmed and vanished. I filmed it on my phone, but the footage came out blank. No lights, no trace of the phenomenon. I stayed out, there past midnight, walking the lines trying to find a source. Eventually the lights faded all at once, like someone threw a switch. That drive home was slower. I checked my rearview mirror too often. Cars behind me never stayed long, but they always reappeared an hour later. Same make, same distance. And black SUV and a tan pickup, alternating, never overtaking. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station with cameras and people. Even then, I sat in the parking lot for an hour, engine running, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. But paranoia doesn't need proof. It just needs repetition. And by the next morning, the repetition had already begun. The next morning, my work account was locked. My badge still opened the lobby, but not the elevator. At my desk, someone else's nameplate had been installed. No one made eye contact. I sat in the break room until security asked if I needed help. I nodded, stood up, and left without a word. Back home, my internet had slowed to a crawl. Pages timed out. My email bounced back with delivery failures, even to contacts I'd written the day before. My phone history showed calls I hadn't made, all outgoing, all to numbers with no area code. When I called one back, a recorded voice said the number had been disconnected. I stopped sleeping. I unplugged everything. Each night, I heard cars, idle outside, never close, just far enough to make denial possible. I started writing notes on paper, keeping a journal the old way. Nothing digital felt safe anymore. That's when I remembered a podcast I'd heard once, one of those fringe shows that covers buried towns, secret cities, things too strange for the news. I searched their archive and found it, a 5-year-old episode about a phantom city grid in the southwest desert. The guest had been a retired intelligence analyst. I tracked his name to a P.O. box in New Mexico. I mailed a letter, carefully worded, asking if the 51st state had ever been real. I didn't expect a reply, but a week later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a thumb drive wrapped in foil, a single sheet of paper with one line. Statehood isn't legal unless it's visible. The files on the drive were old scans, maps, emails, memos from defense contractors and federal departments. Most were marked redacted, but a few were readable. One showed a zoning permit application stamped Echelon Civic District. Another was a requisition form for psychological containment protocols. I stared at them until my eyes burned. Someone had built something in that desert. Not a base, a city, one designed to be forgotten. I didn't know what to do with the truth. I only knew it was too late to walk away from it. And by then, they'd already started erasing me. It started with small things. My apartment key stopped working. The landlord swore he hadn't changed. The locks. My bank flagged me for unusual activity, even though I hadn't used the card in days. Then came the email from my alma mater, politely informing me they had no record of my degree. I called to correct the error, but the registrar's office said my name didn't appear in their archives. I checked other records, property taxes, voting registration, even medical files. Each one came back incomplete or missing. It was as if I'd been removed from every system in pieces, not all at once. At first I panicked. Then I realized panic was part of the design. Confusion weakens resistance. That night I printed every document I still had. Paper copies, receipts, certificates, even traffic tickets. I mailed duplicates to a P.O. box I'd rented under an alias months earlier for unrelated reasons. Paranoia had taught me that redundancy is survival. With my identity unraveling, I needed an outside voice, someone disconnected from official channels. I sent a message to a fringe podcast I'd once dismissed as entertainment. I didn't include details, only coordinates, and one sentence. I've seen the grid. They responded within hours. A burner phone number and a time. I called. The voice that answered was calm, older, and careful. He said he lived inside Echelon. Not near it. Inside it. He told me I'd already passed through without knowing, that most people do, that visibility is a function of compliance. According to him, Echelon was established by a private coalition, ex-military, intelligence retirees, and tech elites. Not illegal, just invisible. They used cognitive redaction techniques, not magic, not sci-fi, just carefully tuned stimuli, signs that don't register, roads that divert memory, broadcast interference that dulls pattern recognition. He said the government didn't suppress it because they didn't build it. They were just kept out like the rest of us. You can't expose what the mind refuses to retain, he said. Before I could ask more, the line dropped. The phone melted. Down 5 minutes later, screen black, casing hot to the touch. That night, I stopped thinking like a witness. I started thinking like an infiltrator. I knew returning to the site was a risk, but staying passive felt worse. The voice on the
phone had changed everything.
If Echelon could hide in plain sight, then access wasn't about location, it was about perception. I left at dawn, driving a different route, using cash for fuel, avoiding main roads. I kept the original coordinates, but this time I brought analog tools, a paper map, a compass, and a camera with no wireless features. By mid-afternoon, I reached the same patch of desert. It looked unchanged, empty, still. But I didn't trust appearances anymore. I began walking in concentric circles, watching for disruptions, anything that felt out of sync. After 2 hours, I saw it, a section of Earth that shimmered slightly when viewed at an angle, like heat distortion. I stepped closer. The air grew heavy, not hot, just thick, like breathing through cloth. Then everything snapped. Sound, weight, light. It was like stepping through a membrane. Ahead of me stood a road, paved and painted, flanked by low buildings with no signage. The air was silent, windless, yet nothing about it felt dead. It was curated. I lifted the camera and took a single photo. The shutter clicked, but the preview screen stayed black. I kept walking, heart pounding, careful not to draw attention. There were no people, but signs of life were everywhere. Vehicles, parked neatly, lights on inside buildings, movement behind tinted glass. I passed a kiosk with a map under glass. It showed a grid labeled District 9 Orientation Sector. Streets had names, but none I recognized. Civic terms, abstract titles, accord loop, signal place, administrative way. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, measured, not running, patrolling. I ducked behind a utility structure and waited. 2 figures walked past in plain uniforms, no weapons, no insignias. Their faces were calm, focused. I held my breath until they turned a corner. Then I backed out the way I came, retracing each step exactly, until the shimmer returned and the desert reappeared. I didn't speak the whole drive home. I didn't sleep that night. I'd seen it. Echelon wasn't a myth. It was real. And it wasn't hiding. It was waiting. They came at night. No lights, no warning. Just the sound of a door forced open and footsteps on hardwood. I woke up disoriented, hands already pulled behind my back before I could speak. A hood covered my face. I was moved fast, carried, loaded, and driven for what felt like hours. No questions, no voices, just motion. When the hood came off, I was in a room with no corners. The walls curved slightly like a cylinder cut in half. One chair bolted to the floor. A light overhead, too bright to ignore. Across from me sat a man in a suit, no name tag, no expression. He didn't ask what I saw. He asked how I felt, confused, uneasy. Then he asked if I felt freer outside the system. His tone was gentle, like a counselor, not an interrogator. Every question followed that pattern. Did I believe in national identity? Did I feel connected to my memories? Did I think truth needed visibility to exist? I didn't answer most of them. The man didn't press. He just watched, nodded, and made notes. Hours passed like that. No threats, no violence, just soft questions designed to pull something loose. Finally, he leaned forward and said, "You're not in danger, Mr. Holloway. You've been selected." I asked, selected for what? He didn't answer. He just stood, walked to the wall, and pressed his palm flat against it. A door appeared, not opened. Appeared. He turned once before leaving. "You're free to go. No one will stop you. But you won't remember everything clearly. That's the cost of walking away." The room went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on my couch at home. No signs of forced entry. My keys on the table, my phone charged. For a full minute, I thought I dreamt it, but the soreness in my wrists and the faint mark across my temple told me otherwise. They didn't erase me, they tested me, and I passed something, some threshold I still didn't understand. But clarity wasn't the goal anymore, survival was. And if they were letting me go, it meant they believed I couldn't undo what they'd done. They were wrong. I didn't try to warn anyone after that. Not directly. No reports, no exposés. It would have been dismissed or, worse, intercepted. Instead, I started teaching, not in a classroom, in libraries, small town halls, quiet back rooms of co-ops and hiking clubs, geography workshops, map reading seminars. I kept it simple, paper,
Maps only, no digital tools.
I showed people how to spot inconsistencies, minor shifts in road alignments, zoning boundaries that don't match public records, utility corridors with no visible purpose. I never used the word echelon, never said 51st, but I asked questions, calm ones. Ever wonder why that road curves for no reason? Why that area is always listed as undeveloped despite grid markers? Most people nodded politely and moved on, but a few paused. A few came back with their own questions. I called them the noticeables. You can't teach truth, not directly, but you can nudge attention. Once someone starts seeing the seams, they can't unsee them. That was the point, not to expose echelon, to let others feel the dissonance, to plant the seed. The ones who returned started to see patterns. 2. Phone towers with no carriers. Blank zones in GPS overlays. Streets that end in perfect loops with no houses. A man from Wyoming mailed me a county map showing a water treatment facility labelled in 6 languages, none of them English. Another from Arizona sent satellite prints of a shadow grid reappearing seasonally only at dawn. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. They were seeing it now. The fabric, fraying, reality editing itself for convenience. I'd become something different, not
A whistleblower, not a rebel. A signal, quiet, consistent, hard to trace. The system can't erase every footprint, and if enough people learn to look down while everyone else stares forward, maybe the illusion won't hold. I don't try to contact Echelon anymore. I already know they're watching. Let them. Let them see what grows in the cracks, because if a state must be seen to be real, then all I need to do is help people learn how to see.
No one believed the old Algonquin warnings, the trees that dream beneath us, but they stayed off the land just the same. Too foggy, they'd say. Too quiet. I never put stock in folklore, not when there were quotas to meet and timber, to move. Name's Tyler Bouchard. I was raised by sawdust and survey tape, not ghost stories. 3rd generation in forestry, I saw the woods as supply, rows of red pines mapped and monetized. That changed last fall when the company reopened. Plot 29, we were just east of the Quebec border, halfway up the La Vérendrye wildlife zone. The map said inactive since 1952. A scribble in red ink. My dad used to joke that zones like this were for the bears, or the buried. We laughed, drank, and never asked why. I wish I had, because by the 3rd day we knew something was off. Chainsaws stopped mid-cut, like they'd hit stone. But there was no stone, just bark. Thick, healthy bark that resisted steel like it had muscle memory. Radios cut out. When they did work, they echoed our voices back, not distorted, not delayed, just repeated. The exact same words, but with different inflection, like someone trying on our speech to see how it fit. That afternoon I found runes. I thought it was hardened sap at first, thick red lines in the grooves of a pine trunk, but the shape was too precise. And it wasn't just on one tree. It was a pattern repeating across several pines in an arc, almost like a boundary or a warning. I touched it. The sap was cold, cold like deep soil in December. My fingertips tingled for hours after. That night I took a sample, sealed it in a clean evidence tube, and mailed it to a friend at the Université de Montréal under an alias. Didn't even tell my crew. The next morning, my compass drifted, GPS too, kept snapping back to the clearing where we'd first cut. No matter how far I walked, I always returned there. The pines were watching, and something beneath them remembered me. I didn't tell the others about the sample. It felt safer that way, Guys like Jerry and Lamont were good with machines and bad with silence. You start talking about sap that hums when you hold it, and suddenly you're the one folks avoid on smoke break. But the sample, it did something in transit. By the time it reached the lab, it had hardened into something else, translucent, almost glassy, laced with a fine filament structure like veins. My contact, Etienne, called me 2 nights later. I'd never heard his voice so tight. He said, "The compound registered trace proteins found in deep-sea extremophiles, life forms that shouldn't share a biosphere with pine trees."
And something else. The sap stored a charge, not static, not electric, bioelectric. It reacted to heat, light, and sound, especially voice. Etienne wanted more. I told him I was thinking of leaving the site, and he said one thing before hanging.
Up. That tree wasn't bleeding. It was transmitting. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in my bunk while Jerry snored through the plywood wall, replaying everything. The strange drift in our GPS. The way I kept hearing my own name on the radio, but never over open channels. Just soft and low, like a whisper under the static. The next morning, I hiked beyond the flagged perimeter. I'd studied the old maps. Our sector hadn't been touched since the 50s, but on foot it was clear someone had been here. Old nails in bark, a rusted coil of fencing swallowed halfway into the base of a pine, and just past a rock outcrop I found it. Concrete, a single corner of it pushing through the moss, like a buried bunker trying to breathe. I cleared the brush and traced the wall to a warped steel door, bent in on itself like something had forced its way out. Inside, the air was warm and still. I stepped in. No power, but light filtered through cracks above. The walls were alive with symbols, runes, same as the trees, except these glowed faintly beneath layers of crystallized sap. When I ran my fingers across them, I didn't just feel texture, I felt pressure, as if the symbols were aware, as if they were waiting to be read. I kept going back. Every morning before the crew stirred, I'd hike out to the bunker, slip inside, and just stand there. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I thought the runes would shift again, or the
sap would speak.
But mostly I felt pulled, like gravity, only softer. One morning I brought a flashlight and swept it across the far wall. There was a panel I hadn't noticed, square, flush with the concrete. I pressed it. Nothing happened, but when I pulled my hand back, a faint outline glowed beneath the dust. The shape matched a Forestry Service insignia. Only, it wasn't one I recognized. That night, Jerry didn't come back. Said he was checking the East Ridge for deadfall, but his radio went dark by sundown. Lamont and I waited, walking the perimeter with headlamps and cold coffee in hand. Around midnight, I heard movement outside my trailer. I stepped out fast, expecting Jerry. Instead, there was a soft rustling at the edge of the tree line. Then a voice. Not his, not exactly. It was Jerry's tone, his rhythm, but slowed down and hollow, like someone reading a script without knowing what the words meant. I called out. Nothing, just the wind through the pines, shifting in that slow, rhythmic way it does when the canopy moves all at once. Lamont never heard it, or said he didn't. He chalked it up to stress and fog, maybe wildlife. I stopped arguing. Instead, I pulled the old topographical maps again, spread them across the mess table, and marked every site flagged inaccessible, sealed, or worse, classified under external authority. The language was vague, but the pattern was clear. This wasn't just restricted land, it was managed, watched, maybe even studied. I circled plot 29, then the ridge to the north, where the map listed an old observation tower long since removed, except I'd seen it, or what was left of it. Just the support beams, bent and covered in bark, like the forest had tried to reclaim metal and failed halfway. The pieces didn't line up, but they weren't random. Someone had been here before, us, and whatever they'd found, they hadn't just buried it. They'd built around it, like containment or quarantine. 2 days later, Jerry walked out of the woods at dawn. His clothes were soaked, his boots gone, and his eyes glassy. He didn't speak, just sat down on the trailer steps and stared at the dirt. I asked where he'd been. He blinked once, then said, "I followed the lines." That was it. Nothing
else. Lamont tried joking with him, but Jerry wouldn't respond. He wouldn't eat either, just kept muttering that he wasn't cold even though his skin felt like ice.
We radioed for medevac, but dispatch said the weather was closing in. No flights for 24 hours. We wrapped him in blankets and waited. That night, I was reviewing photos I'd taken of the old bunker wall. On my screen, the runes were gone, just smooth concrete. I checked another file, same result. It wasn't a camera glitch. The shapes were simply missing, like they'd never been there. But I remembered them. The grooves, the faint red glow, the feeling in my fingertips. They were real. The next morning, Jerry was gone again. His bedding was dry. No footprints, no sign he'd left. Just the same whispering static on the radio repeating, "I followed the lines." Lamont swore under his breath and radioed dispatch. No response. Static again. I offered to hike toward the ridge, but he shook his head. "We're not splitting up, not after this." He left the radio on for hours, calling every 30 minutes. No one answered. By dusk, he stopped trying. I hiked north alone, toward where the tower once stood. The trees grew closer there, tighter than they should. Their spacing wasn't natural.
Not random. Every 20 feet, a red pine perfectly aligned.
Like markers. Beneath one, I noticed the soil was soft. I dug with my hands, brushing aside pine needles until I hit something hard. Metal, a panel. Old, rusted, but not broken. I cleared more and found a seam, a door. My compass needles spun. The air was still, but the ground beneath me pulsed, almost like breath. Lamont was waiting by the trailers, pacing. When I told him I hadn't seen Jerry, he didn't say anything. Just stared at the tree line. Later, over coffee, he finally spoke. My grandfather used to talk about this place. Said it never felt right. He paused, looked down at his hands. I thought he was drunk. Now I'm not so sure. That night, I dreamed of roots. Not the tangled kind you trip over in shallow soil. These were deep, wide, and impossibly organized. They moved with purpose, sliding past each other like nerves firing under skin. When I woke, my hands were dirty, pine needles under my nails. I'd been sleepwalking, back to the clearing. My boots were caked in the same reddish loam I'd dug through the day before. The door had called me, even in sleep. It wasn't just memory. It was direction. I returned after breakfast, tools in my pack, and a voice recorder clipped to my belt. Lamont asked where I was headed. I lied, said I was checking boundary markers. He barely looked up. Jerry's disappearance had changed the mood in camp. Everyone moved slower, spoke softer, like we all knew the forest was listening. The panel came free with little effort. Just rust and time holding it in place. Beneath, a narrow shaft dropped straight down, no ladder, no markings, just a smooth descent into black. I lowered a line with a flashlight taped to the end. It swung gently, brushing the walls. 10 feet, maybe 15. I climbed in. The space below was tight. Cold air rose past my face, damp and metallic. The floor was dry, smooth, and level, unnatural for this depth. Along the walls, the same runes from the bunker glowed faintly under layers of crystallized sap. But here they pulsed in rhythm. Not light, exactly. More like color shifting under pressure. I turned on the recorder. The static began immediately. Then voices. Mine at first, then Etienne's, then my father's, all saying the same word. Down! I followed the corridor. The walls narrowed. The sap symbols became denser. Some had changed, more detailed, almost fractal in shape. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber, perfect circle, no debris. In the center stood a stump, not cut, not broken, just clean, polished wood rising waist-high, its surface etched with lines like tree rings, except the pattern wasn't natural. It was too precise, too symmetrical. When I touched it, the room warmed slightly. My pulse slowed. I didn't feel fear, I felt recognition, like I'd been here before, or left something behind. I don't remember climbing out. I woke up at my trailer, boots by the door, hands clean. The recorder was still clipped to my belt, but the file was gone. Not corrupted, just missing. In its place was a folder I hadn't made, labeled Return. Inside, only silence. I replayed it 4 times before noticing the waveform. It wasn't flat. It pulsed every 3.6 seconds, perfectly spaced. Not sound, not speech. A pattern. I tried to act normal, but something had shifted. Lamont noticed. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He nodded, but didn't believe me. Neither did I. That night I heard the trees. Not wind. Not branches creaking. Language. Not words exactly, more like mood. A low frequency of emotion carried through the forest floor. The sound came from beneath, like vibration through hollow wood. When I closed my eyes, I saw rings again, those same concentric etchings from the stump. Only now they moved. They weren't markings. They were maps. I called Etienne, told him I needed to meet in person. He hesitated, then agreed. I packed my things, left Lamont a note, said I was heading to the regional office. I didn't believe I'd be back. As I drove south, the trees thinned, but the feeling stayed. The woods didn't fade behind me. They followed. Every pine I passed looked older, redder, like it remembered me. Etienne met me in a parking lot near the university. He looked exhausted, said he'd kept digging, found a decommissioned federal. Record labeled Borological Control, phase null. No details, no signatures, just coordinates, matching plot 29. He said the runes resembled a dormant linguistic form, one used to store symbolic memory. Not speech, not script. A cognitive scaffold, sap as storage. The sap's layered with a protein mesh, he said, rubbing his temple. Some of it reacts to voltage, like biocircuitry. You're not just touching it, you're syncing with
it. Pine trees don't think, Tyler, but the roots. They might record. He asked what I'd found out there.
I tried to answer but couldn't form the words. My mind felt scrambled. Not empty. Rewritten. When I closed my eyes, I saw the roots again, moving like thought. And when Etienne asked what I was planning to do next, I said something I didn't
expect. I think I left something open. I drove back before sunrise, didn't tell Etienne, didn't tell anyone. The forest wasn't calling anymore. It was waiting. I parked at the edge of plot 29 and walked in with nothing but a headlamp and a field notebook I hadn't opened in days.
The fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it, but not cold. It carried warmth, almost humid, like breath from a living body. My GPS spun as expected. I didn't bother checking it again. The clearing hadn't changed. The hatch was still open. The tunnel below was silent. I climbed down, boots finding familiar holds. The stump was there, just as I'd left it. The runes on the walls no longer pulsed. They glowed steady now, waiting. I placed my hand on the wood. The warmth was immediate, but deeper this time. It wasn't heat, it was memory. A sensation of being recognized, as if the forest itself had remembered me and was ready to resume. The floor shifted slightly beneath me. Not shaking, breathing. A low hum filled the chamber, and my thoughts slowed. Then they stopped being mine alone. I saw faces I didn't know. Buildings long gone. My father, younger, standing at this same stump, his hand in the same place. This wasn't the first time. It had never just been me. The Bouchards had always come back. I tried to pull away, but my hand didn't move. Not stuck, willing, I let the forest move through me. I didn't feel erased. I felt translated. My thoughts dissolved into pattern. My memory folded into shape. The red sap had never been blood. It was signal. The trees were synapses. The rings were code. And the fog, that was mind. When I stepped outside again, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The pines moved with me now, not in step, but in rhythm. Lamont would leave. The others too. The land would reclaim the rest quietly, as it always had. I walk now further each day. The forest doesn't spread in size, it spreads in thought. And I guide them in, not to warn, but to teach.
Them how to listen. The roots of the red pines are awake, and they remember everything.